This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
And a very good morning to you. It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think I've already told you the answer to this, but it might be a helpful test of how much attention you were paying at the time. But there has always been, since the phrase first appeared in the outer recesses of social media, there has always been an extremely reliable way of working out that all talk of two-tier policing during the Farage riots last summer was, at best nonsensical and at worst downright dangerous, designed very deliberately to foster far-right claims that police services in this country, and indeed a criminal justice system that has been shown repeatedly and even found by official inquiries to be institutionally racist against people of colour, people with black skin or brown skin. Of course, far-right white supremacists are desperate to believe, or at least desperate to persuade the weak-minded to believe, that the truth is in fact the opposite of what their eyes and ears tell them, that the criminal justice system or the police services are in fact biased against white people. It's 5 minutes after 10, and occasionally I stumble across a Rosetta Stone, a skeleton key to unlock a story so powerful that I am very conscious of how bad I am at keeping things to myself. So I'd have been a rubbish spy. I always quite fancied being a spy as a kid. I'm reading a brilliant espionage novel at the moment. I told you about it last week, but I gave you the wrong title, for which I apologise. I gave you the title of the first novel in the series, but I'll give you the correct information later in the programme. I'd have been a rubbish spy because if I'd pulled off an amazing mission, I'd have wanted to tell everybody. I'd have come on the radio the next morning and sort of started dropping hints. I'd have been like, you know that mysterious assassination in Kiev at the weekend. Well, I'm just saying that I wasn't at home on Saturday, or whatever it might be. Assassination of a baddie, obviously, of a Russian actor. So I'm very bad at keeping things to myself, and yet this observation is so powerful that I certainly can't run the risk of forgetting to tell you, but it makes such a nonsense of any claim whatsoever that there is or that there was two-tier policing over the course of last summer's riots just fall apart in your hands. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. In fact, and we'll open Idiot's Corner early this morning. Mark's been in touch. He says, the radical left mouthpiece takes his turn. Time to turn off. I think we can add the phrase radical left to phrases that really stupid people use without having the first idea what they mean. So I'm grateful to Mark this morning for not only opening up the gates of Idiot's Corner, but also for reminding us of the power of these phrases that excuse bigoted people, the sometimes quite draining effort of thinking about things and trying to understand things. So there's something I don't understand, and we're going to put in the effort to try. So as I read this morning about police forces being unprepared for the level of violence that broke out during the Farage riots, and I read also that the inquiry by the Home Affairs Committee into the aftermath of the dreadful killings of those three little girls, that the police silence made the violence worse. That's the headline in the Daily Telegraph. It's a little greyer than that in the detail. It cannot be determined, they conclude, whether the disorder could have been prevented had more information been published. However, the lack of information created a vacuum where misinformation was able to grow, further undermining public confidence. Can you work out what I'm troubled by here? I've thought this from the very start. I thought this from the moment that Farage started bleating about how it wasn't his fault that people were spreading. It wasn't his fault that he spread misinformation about the Southport stabbings and then tried to blame it all on Andrew Tate, who he has, of course, previously described as part of the same phenomenon to himself. Made no secret of his admiration for for Andrew Tate. But him trying to claim that it's the police's fault that we spread misinformation troubled me at the time, and it troubles me now for two reasons. The first is that we should surely be dedicating our attentions to telling people minded to spread misinformation to sit down and shut up. In fact, to even bring measures against people who could be shown in court who have incited violence by dint of spreading their misinformation. It seems to me, in a way, that you are coming at the problem from the wrong angle. You're coming at the problem from the wrong end. Oh, well, look, if the police don't go against operational procedures and reveal everything they know about somebody accused of a crime before anybody has even been charged, perhaps, but certainly before anybody has been brought to court, then I'm afraid that you're just going to... I mean, it's not our fault that we started spreading all sorts of lies about people having recently arrived here in a small boat, or people being asylum seekers, or people being Muslims. You can't... Listen, if the police won't tell us things that they don't particularly want to tell us, you can't blame us for making stuff up and lying about things. Do you see my problem? And I'm very, I don't think lonely is quite the right word, but I do seem to be paddling a fairly empty canoe on this one. And that's why the phone lines are open, because you could perhaps quite easily explain to me why I'm barking up the wrong tree on this and everybody else is barking up the right tree. If someone tells lies, I mean, look, the point about the old freedom of speech adage about shouting fire in a crowded cinema or a crowded theatre, you know that one, right? Everyone knows that one. So you say, oh, freedom of speech is wonderful. You must have absolutely unlimited freedom of speech. I say, what about if you stand up in a crowded theatre with it's only got 2 exits and you shout fire at the top of your voice, everyone pegs it for the exit. God, there's a phrase I haven't used since about 1984. Everyone pegs it for the exit. It even rhymes. God, it's dropping them all over the place today. Everybody pegs it for the exit, and some people fall over, and in the stampede, people get crushed to death or people die. So you can't shout fire in an empty cinema. It would be difficult to bring criminal charges, but it's a figure of speech for a reason. You tell lies that cause violence, you are responsible in part for that violence. So what would happen here? What would they stand up and say in the event of someone shouting fire in a crowded cinema, causing a stampede that leaves people dead, and then being asked to account for their actions later? Well, I think you'll find that the failure of the cinema to make regular announcements that it was not in fact on fire is the real reason that created the vacuum into which I could step and then shout fire at the top of my voice. This is, I think I'm on the right track, aren't I? Since when did we start saying, oh, if you don't do that, then the liars will have a field day? And when did we stop saying lying is bad, silence and punish the liars? Of course, it happened online. Of course, Elon Musk is the owner of the platform where it happened. Of course, Elon Musk has joined in with all of the claims that this would somehow stifle free speech. Telling people not to tell lies that prompt other people potentially to set fire to hotels full of human beings doesn't strike me as stifling free speech. If they were telling the truth, we're nearly there, we're nearly at the problem, we're nearly at the thing that really, really troubles me about this whole story, this whole scenario. But we're not there yet. It's backwards, right? It's just looking at a problem that has been caused by people and trying to blame people who did not cause the problem. I'd love to know what police officers think about this. I'd love to know what lawyers think about this. We respect, said the committee of MPs, the Home Affairs Committee, to be precise. We respect the Crown Prosecution Service's commitment to minimising risks to successful prosecutions. That is why they often don't provide information to the public that they may have come across themselves, because it can limit a successful prosecution. It can prejudice a trial. But it is clear that neither the law on contempt nor existing CPS guidance for the media and police are fit for the social media age. And that, I think, is the point. And that might be the chink in the armour of my confidence this morning. My confidence that this is bad and or backwards. And the chink in the armour of my confidence might be the possibility or the plausibility of the criminal justice system keeping pace with the social media age. It's why, unfortunately, I find myself having to mention Elon Musk again this morning. If Twitter and other social media platforms were properly regulated, then potentially insightful claims would arguably have disappeared very, very quickly. Certainly back when I was on Twitter a lot before he took over, the regulation was not perfect, but it was pretty good. There were things you couldn't do. There were people who would be removed. If you were found, for example, to be in the business of spreading insightful lies, like Andrew Tate was on that during that particular episode, your account would actually be closed down. One of the first things Elon Musk did when he arrived in the building was to actually reinstall all of these provocative, often far-right accounts, all of these accounts dedicated to spreading often racist lies. They've all come back with a vengeance. They pay Elon Musk a few bucks a month and they can earn quite healthy livings from just endlessly posting CCTV footage of people in other countries committing crimes, as long as they're not white. Just don't publish any footage of any white people committing crimes. God forbid you do that. You'd let the whole cat out of the bag. So that's problem number one. And that is something you might be able to answer. Do I sound like a well-meaning dinosaur? Hocus pocus, I'm a diplodocus. Do I sound like a well-meaning dinosaur when I say I think that the system should actually be able to deal with liars rather than change to accommodate and acknowledge the fact that if we don't change the way that we do things, the liars will win out. The liars will cause riots. I'd like to see the liars punished as much as the people who responded to the lies by taking to the streets. But that, of course, hasn't happened as much as you might have hoped. Some of them were quite rightly banged up, but not all of them, it seems to me, have been held accountable for the forces they helped unleash during that season of rioting. So that is, I don't know who's qualified to answer that question. Hopefully you are. But is it actually the case that social media gets, I mean, it makes us, it's like a turbocharged version of that old line about a lie being halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. And that, of course, was a figure of speech long before social media was invented. I think it was a figure of speech before computers were invented, or even perhaps telephones. A lie will be halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. Imagine a magnifying lens which increases images by a factor of 1,000. And now look at that figure of speech through that lens. A lie is halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. It's 1,000 times truer than it was in the world before social media, 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000 times. And that is the bit I don't get. Whether or not what seems obvious to me, of course you don't change the way that you do things because of the way that liars, and often in this case racist liars, behave. But actually, the changing technology means that they have to. So that's question number one. And this is by far from the most troubling question that I'm going to ask you this morning. Should the police be revealing details of suspects if bad actors are going to lie about these details in the hope of causing the kind of riots that we saw last summer? Should the police actually be revealing details? And I think you can see the scary bit now, right? You can see the question that's been bothering me since this happened. And that is, what did they think would happen? So you say he's not a Muslim. He's not an asylum seeker. He's not recently arrived on a small boat. And everyone is just going to pack up their Molotov cocktails and go home. Well, maybe, fingers crossed. But what if he had been all of those things? I just worry that the subtext to all of these conversations is that if the man who committed these hideous crimes had been any of the things that racists obsess about endlessly on social media, a refugee, the massive majority of whom are entirely and utterly peaceful, a Muslim, the massive majority of whom are entirely and utterly peaceful, a small boat arrival, the massive majority of whom are entirely peaceful. What's the message that's being sent to the British public? If he had been any of the things that racist liars obsess about endlessly on social media, that it would have been okay to riot? I'm looking you in the eye now. because I think I might be going mad. I can't see how else this story breaks down, and I don't think I've heard anybody else ask this question. What makes this information so important? Answer, well, it would have calmed things down if they'd known he wasn't any of the things that they said he was. Well, what happens if he is? It's okay to set fire to emergency accommodation full of human beings if a former refugee or an asylum seeker or somebody raised in the Muslim faith has committed hideous murders in Southport. It's okay to attack entirely innocent people if the crimes committed over there on the other side of the country have been committed by somebody who fits into this demographic or this category or this pigeonhole. I can't see how else this story breaks down. 0345 6060 973. Should the police be revealing information of the kind that applies in this case, saying that he is a Christian, saying that he is not a refugee, saying that his family did not come across on small boats, or are they right to keep it quiet? And of course, contingent upon that question is the notion of whether or not technology has overtaken what would once have been fairly obvious principles, obvious at least to me. You don't change the rules because of how the liars will behave. You go after the liars. And then the second question, possibly one of the most worrying questions I've ever asked you. But do you agree with me? And I really want you to disagree. But if you agree, I want to hear your voice as well. Do you agree with me that the way all of this has been covered makes it sound as if, had the killer actually been a Muslim asylum seeker rather than a British citizen of Christian origin, then the riots somehow, in the minds of these people, including quite senior, quite high up people, then the riots would somehow have been okay or permissible. What am I don't think I'm missing anything. I ask you that question too often. It's false modesty. Oh, I don't understand this. Oh, what am I don't think I'm missing anything. I think that we're trying to reframe the rules to accommodate the racist liars. And I think that we're sending a message out to the British public that, oh, if he had been a Muslim asylum seeker, then setting fire to emergency accommodation full of refugees would actually have been okay. Tell me that I'm wrong on 0345 6060 973, or, of course, tell me that I'm right. You know the number.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's the second bit I struggle with most. It's the second bit I really don't want to be true. The first bit, listen, I'm not qualified to conclude beyond doubt that in a world where social media is presided over by people like Elon Musk, the idea of expecting it to keep dangerous lies out of the public sphere, the idea that it will punish dangerous liars, I don't think that that's fanciful or pie in the sky, but maybe it is. The second bit, when they say that police silence over Southport killings made riot violence worse, what are they saying would happen if all of the lies told and spread by people like Andrew Tate, who, of course, Nigel Farage explained had been his source for fake news? What are they saying would have been acceptable or would have been the case if all of these lies had actually not been lies at all? I think that is one of the most worrying questions I've ever asked you. And I want you to explain to me why this coverage does not mean that the society we live in has essentially concluded, up to and including the Home Affairs Committee, that had the killer of those poor little girls in Southport been, or rather not been, a British-born Christian, then the riots would somehow have had a different moral weight, a different moral value. Martin's in Newark in Sussex. Martin, what would you like to say?
So, yeah, thanks for having me on, James. I think what I wanted to say really comes down to the question of what social media is for. Yeah. And I think that the biggest purpose it serves is really as a marketing tool for people and for companies. And I think that what a lot of these men were doing last summer was marketing themselves. They were trying to raise their profile with potential customers.
Or voters.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yes,
really.
I know you
When
do.
we're talking about Farage, he's looking for people who will sign up I don't know whether Reform is still a company, but, it is that cynical in a way. He's looking to...
Well, leaving that aside, not because it's not interesting, because I don't think it's particularly relevant to this. A vote is custom in the context that you describe. And so posting a video suggesting that, quotes, the truth is being withheld from the public is a very deliberate attempt to sort of set yourself up as an opponent to law and order, or an opponent to whatever decisions the police have decided in the heat of an operational moment to take.
Precisely. And I think that the obviously lead character in this, kind of worldwide drama is the brand master-in-chief, Donald Trump, who has done this consistently for about 10 years now, where he has put lies out.
They're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, and that's a light-hearted example of the kind of lies that we're talking about. Let me nudge you, if I may, to the second bit of this.
Yeah.
What if the killer had been any of the things that people like Andrew Tate were claiming? This is the bit I really wish I had managed to unravel differently. That they were anti-Muslim and racist riots, and the message we're receiving today, I think, from the Home Affairs Committee is, well, they wouldn't have happened if we'd made it clear that he wasn't a Muslim, or that he was British. And A, I'm not sure that's true, but B, much more worryingly, what if the killer had been all of those things? Are we literally, or at least implicitly, creating an environment in which we're saying then, well, in that case, the riots would have been okay?
Okay, well, this is a really complicated one.
I know it is.
But of course, it's a legal principle that a person is innocent until proven guilty.
Yes.
And one of the things that is happening, because the internet is so lax in terms of how social media is regulated and everything else, is people can just lie with impunity. The people who say, I want freedom of speech, they're often saying, what I want is the freedom to lie. And so I think, personally, it needs to be a principle that, firstly, the police have a method of knowing which real person is behind a social media account.
Yeah.
And then they need to have the ability to deactivate that social media account if it spreads lies, because it's a criminal offence.
That's interesting.
I think those people should have effectively like a 3 strikes rule. You've done it once, we find you. You've done it twice, we find you more. Now you're banned and you can't be on social media. And I think if you were to actually link social media to real people and then force them...
Well, they kind of did. I mean, the Daily Telegraph had an embolism about it, but people who had been either encouraging the actual attacks and riots, or very much engaging in the spreading of the disinformation, which everybody seems to agree either caused them or amplified them. And whenever they got a knock on the door, the Daily Telegraph had a fit of the vapours.
Well, surprise, surprise, the Daily Telegraph were the people who are having a fit of the vapours. I imagine the Daily Mail as well. I remember when the Daily Mail stopped being able to cite the Daily Mail because it was so inaccurate.
Yeah. Well, I think Wikipedia made that decision some time ago as well.
They did. And with the Daily Telegraph, I mean, you speak about it on the weekly. It's very funny how wrong they are all the time. So they themselves want the freedom to lie.
or if they're not them, then certainly they want other people to have the freedom to post racist incitement. I don't know. It's hard not to arrive at that conclusion. What a lovely start. Thank you, Martin. It's coming up to 10:30. There are 2 questions before us today. They are incredibly difficult. The second one, almost impossibly so. The first is pretty straightforward. Is it unreasonable to expect the authorities, whatever phrase you prefer, to go after the liars rather than to have the establishment conclude that lying is now so commonplace and so dangerous that the police should change the way it's done things for generations and reveal information about suspects in crimes in order, or in the hope of assuaging violent responses? It's not the pithiest question I've ever asked you, but I think you've got the gist of it. And then the second one is pretty simply, all the talk about how the riots would not have been so bad if the misinformation had been closed down. I mean, and I know some of the people that we've talked about today would have just claimed that we were being lied to. How swift is the move from claiming that, they're keeping information from us, to claiming that the information that they're giving us is not true. I think quite a few of you are making that point. Here it is. I love your show, but you've missed the obvious answer here. If the police had told everyone that the killer was a Christian man, a British Christian man, then the usual suspects would just have said that the police were lying, or that they can't be sure, or that they would say that, wouldn't they? The liars don't play by the rules, so it doesn't matter if you change the rules to try and reel them in. They'll just keep breaking the rules. And that leaves me, almost agog at the conclusion that all of this coverage creates the idea that if the killer had not been a British Christian, then the riots would somehow have been excusable, understandable, or morally different from how they were when people believed things that turned out not to be true. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. It's 10:31 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
34, and there is a lot going on here. None of it very pretty, and some of it profoundly worrying. Everyone will be familiar with the hideous events that polluted our streets over the course of the summer after that unspeakable murder of 3 little girls in Southport. I never know what families prefer. I'm certainly not conceited enough to think that everybody's listening to this programme, but I don't think I'm going to say the name of the killer. I'll remind you of the names of the little girls, but if it was me, I don't know how I'd respond to hearing them coming out of my radio, whether it would make me whether it would trigger me or make me sad, but I should say them at least once. B.B. King, Elsie Dot Stankham and Alice de Silva Aguiar. And we all remember the events that followed, the ludicrous claims, very deliberately provocative and divisive claims of two-tier policing. The report we're talking about this morning has described those claims as disgraceful and baseless, adding explanations of how it undermined precisely the same officers who were at the front line of the violence, the officers who were bearing the brunt of the violence. And I have got for you before 11 o'clock the most perfect proof that claim was always disgusting, always disgraceful, always wrong, and always ugly. But the idea that we should, or the authorities, in this case the police or the CPS, should reveal known details of the killer when untrue details are percolating and circulating on social media and either causing or exacerbating violence, it troubles me hugely. One of the things found in his bedroom, of course, was a manual associated with ISIS. So never mind that he was British, never mind that he was Christian, that simple fact, and never mind that his bedroom was full of all manner of material that demonstrated a deep interest in violence, pure and simple, all manner of violence, all types of violence. But if that little bit of detail had come out alongside the bit about him being British, or him being from a Christian family, or him having grown up in Cardiff, having been born in Cardiff, I just don't know what the message I'm supposed to be receiving is. And that message seems to me to be, if he had been any of the things that all the liars said he was, then the riots would have had a different moral dimension. And of course they wouldn't. It's a bit like the way in which some people only care about child sexual abuse if it's been committed by Muslims, up to and including very serious senior, I beg your pardon, desperately unserious, but very senior politicians. The last Tory administration didn't implement hardly any of the recommendations made in the report by Baroness J. They spent years examining child sexual abuse in all sorts of contexts, including grooming gangs, including my own school, including the Catholic Church, including sporting institutions. All sorts of investigations went on, all sorts of conclusions were made. Nobody ever talks about any of them. But when the perpetrators are of Pakistani heritage, it's the biggest story in town. I don't know whether that counts as two-tier reporting or two-tier responding or two-tier policing, but the number of children abused by Catholic priests who've never seen any justice is off the charts. I was in Ireland at the weekend, and I saw some fascinating statistics on just the collapse in church-going in Ireland as a consequence of what came out over there. And yet here, unless it's been committed by someone of Pakistani heritage, it barely seems to be a story at all. And this looks to me to be evidence of a similar, what's the word I want? Problem? Idea? 10:38 is the time. Khalid is in Wood Green. Khalid, what made you pick up the phone?
I swear, James, you said everything I was planning to say. You are unbelievable. I love your program.
That's theft. That's plagiarism, that is. I should pay you a royalty, Khalid.
You are one of the best journalists, not even in England, in the whole world.
Oh, stop it. Thank you.
No. This is first time in my life I speak in the radio or I speak to any channel. Exactly. I was last year when that atrocity happened. I was in Tunisia on holiday. And I was really scared to come back. I'm Muslim myself and my family. My wife, she's Catholic.
Right.
What I can see is that I live here in this country over maybe 17 years.
Yes.
And the things keep changing for worse. Everything, they're blaming us for it. For God's sake, this guy, he was Muslim, he was Christian. He have nothing to do with us. If he was asylum seeker or if he born there, so he's now Christian and he is born in Cardiff. Shall I blame the all English people or the Christian people?
Well, all the Welsh people, careful, this is controversial enough without you putting Cardiff in England. All the Welsh people you'd be blaming, not all the English people. Yes.
Exactly. So I don't know why now, and thank God there is program like yours. He can focus on these things. The other channel in the TV is absolutely disgraced. They're blaming us. They're talking about this gang from Pakistan, and then they make the things look. You focus in the victim, or you focus on the justice, or you focus on what?
So
lost.
We're not in full agreement with each other on this. You feel that it would have protected you from potential abuse if the identity or some of the identifying characteristics of the Southport killer had been revealed. But what happens when there is another crime, if, please God, not when, there is another crime, and the crime has been committed by people whose personal characteristics fit the prejudices of far-right liars online? What if the lies are true next time? Then where are you left by that? Because you've created the environment in which the information is going to be revealed. It's not going to wait until a court case. They're going to put it out because the usual suspects are telling lies on Twitter.
It's true. That was Andrew Tate as well. He did all these things online, and the police should come out. But I swear, I feel as well, if it shouldn't make any difference if they said the guy is an asylum seeker or he is a Muslim, or he shouldn't, because anyway, arrest him, take him to the normal procedure. Why these people, they have to go attacking mosques, attacking people in the street for just identity? This is not really British. I am proud of this country. My children born here. I don't know. We have nothing to do with this. We are very peaceful people. We don't get engaged in all this kind of things. Just to deal with everyone equal under the law, under the British police.
But in 10 years, that's gone from sounding like something that almost everybody agreed with to sounding like some sort of, idealism almost, as if it's some sort of impossible idealism.
We blamed. I have no idea why I have been blamed, because someone from my religion or my skin color, he did some. So the guy in Luton, the guy, he killed his family and then he was going to kill all children in the school. Yes. That should I blame the whole Christianity or the whole Luton people? This is mad. But why they have platform to talk about these things in the TV? And they lived in. I'm with this free speech, but this is not free speech.
And your voice is reasonable and often absent from
my son next to me say to me, "What's going on, Daddy? Why? Because
why? What's it got to do with me? Why are they attacking a mosque? And even if a crime was to be committed by a Muslim, why would you go and attack a mosque? Any mosque, let alone a mosque in a different city? You can almost see how someone might have problems with a mosque that somebody actually worshipped in. But when's the last time a church got attacked after somebody who calls himself a Christian was convicted of committing crimes? I can't remember. That's not a rhetorical question. It has happened. But I listened to Khalid, and you sort of find yourself stroking your chin, metaphorically go, oh yes, but you might say that. But when did we stop being a country that just recognised everything he said is true? If someone punches me in the face, it doesn't hurt more or less according to where they went to school or what religion they were introduced to by their own parents or what country they were born in. If Khalid hits me in the face, does it hurt less than if somebody from Poland or somebody from Preston or somebody from, where's he from, Wood Green? Does it change if your children, this is a brilliant point Sheena makes. The message I'm getting, James, is that the people who went onto the streets or sent others onto the streets only care about who kills your kids, not that your kids have been murdered. Which leads us back to the earlier caller took us, somewhat to my surprise, Donald Trump and these attempts to demonise entire demographics, entire sections of society, an absolutely crucial part of all examples of fascism that we've seen through the ages. You've got to find an enemy, and that's what they're doing. A terrible crime happens, you just say it's a member of the enemy. What's the enemy? Asylum-seeking Muslim refugees. Why? Massive majority of them wish you no harm. They've never done anything bad. Yeah, but what? Well, we better start telling people that they're not asylum-seeking Muslim refugees, otherwise there might be more riots. Okay, so what happens if somebody from a Muslim country who has come here seeking asylum turns out to be an irredeemable wrong-un or has some sort of mental collapse? What happens then? What are we telling these people that set fire to emergency accommodation? We're telling them that's okay? Oh no, as you were. Turns out he was an asylum seeker. Turns out he did come over here on a small boat. So you crack on, mate. Here, I'll give you your lighter back. It's just how it looks to me, and so far nobody has even tried to tell me that I'm wrong. Probably because I'm not.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:47. Khalid mentioned the case of the 19-year-old in Luton who had killed his family and then, just due to particularly vigilant policing, was prevented from going on a US-style school massacre. Nobody sets fire to institutions associated with people like him, whatever that would mean. The man who murdered Louise Hunt, her sister and her mother, did so shortly after searching the internet for misogynistic podcasts and listening to an array of Andrew Tate content in the 24 hours leading up to the murder. So if you're going to attack a mosque because you think that a murderer might be a Muslim, what do you do to someone who has been literally downloading content from an identifiable self-described misogynist in the 24 hours before he went off to commit a murder? And then, incredibly, this weird scenario that we found ourselves in, it's the same man who spread the misinformation about the Southport killings and was the subject of internet searches and being listened to by this man before he went out and murdered his ex-girlfriend, her sister and her mother. So this talk of two-tier policing is absurd, borderline obscene. Unless you can make a good case of explaining that this story doesn't somehow create the idea that if the killer in Southport had certain characteristics, if he had come over here on a small boat, or he was from a Muslim background, or he hadn't been born in Britain, then it would have been okay to set fire to emergency accommodation and mosques and to attack police officers and to post all manner of racist incitements. It's just bonkers. And I thought Khalid really came closest to summing it up most perfectly when he sort of spoke to the idea that we used to be better than this. And we really did. It's 10:49. Barry is in Ibstock. Barry, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Actually, what I'd like to pick up on first is the difference between how fact and opinion and how social media has changed the landscape and what that means. We used to be in a position where it took a long time to get an opinion out, which means it could be fact-checked more, and it was going to be more accurate. Now with social media, we are in a position where I can have an opinion that can go out. If I'm in a group that shares that opinion, that can just turn into a wildfire. And we're now got what can be perceived as fact, which is solely based on opinion, no fact-checking.
And then you have people like Farage coming out and claiming that because, let me get the quote quite correct, because some very prominent folks with big followings are spreading the lies, then everybody should trust them or everybody should take them seriously. It's as if he's inviting people to surrender any relationship. Well, I suppose for a Donald Trump fan, it goes with the territory, but the truth doesn't matter. Andrew Tate has said that this is the case, so, maybe it is. Andrew Tate has said that this is the case, says Nigel Farage. Therefore, we should probably take the suggestion seriously. It's extraordinary. The more you think about it, the madder it gets.
And this is, social media is in its, let's just say its infancy. It's a new phenomenon. We've not had time to develop as a society to understand how social media impacts us.
Yeah.
if we then take that onto your point about asking about the police, should they have released information and stuff? Now, it takes a long time to change legislation. It takes a long time to change how we do things on an official level. Far, far slower than the pace that social media can change our society.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
We're always on the back foot when it comes to something like this. So to be pointing out, should we be changing things, is a larger question, I think, that we need to look at.
Well, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation has suggested that you could reveal, for example, name, nationality and age without any risk of being prejudicial. So the police could reveal that without any risk of being prejudicial. I mean, that is just one man, albeit a prominent King's Counsel, offering up his opinion, his considered findings. His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services also argue that the police should have better anticipated the risk of disorder, and that but that's a separate point. The planned protests, there was no guarantee they'd remain peaceful. But this is the bit I find scariest, or most alarming. I'm not scared by it, I'm angry. What I find most alarming is the idea that this sends out a message that had the killer in Southport been any of the things that people like Andrew Tate said he was, and people like Nigel Farage pretended to believe were viable contributions to public discourse, then the riots would have had a different moral dimension. It would almost have sounded as if, it sounds to me today, Barry, as if they are saying, oh no, if he had been any of those things, then we wouldn't have been able to stop the riots, and then in brackets, in silence, implicitly, because that would have been fair enough. We could
and that's where I struggle, because I think the hypocrisy is so glaringly obvious. The riots, this whole discussion, it's about trying to explain the actions of anti-Islamic racists. That's clear and simple to me. And I said this to your researcher, if there was a story about a member of the clergy, a Christian organisation who's done a heinous crime, would we see riots outside of churches and churches being set alight? No, of course not. The only reason that this was done, that the riots happened, was because it gave racists and anti-Islamics a feeling of ability to carry out these actions. There was no justification. The hypocrisy is glaringly obvious, in my opinion.
Yeah, and yet, I mean, at risk of sounding like I'm patting myself on the back, I don't hear these points being made in many other places, and yet they are blindingly obvious. How many people who are, well, I hesitate to reach for the litany. Thank you, Barry. You know what the litany is, the list of things that people in public life have been publicly espousing without any penalties, without any punishments, without any apologies or embarrassment. So you'd go back to austerity, which is a little bit more nuanced. Then you've got the idea that Brexit was going to go brilliantly. How many people in my line of work, for example, told you that? Then you've got the idea that Boris Johnson was going to be a brilliant prime minister, that he was a stand-up guy, that he could be trusted. Then you got the idea that Liz Truss was some sort of economic sage, and that her fiscal event was, what was it Farage said, the best he'd seen since 1986. Then you've got the idea that Donald Trump isn't going to be remotely fascistic or dangerous or a threat to our interests here in the United Kingdom. And I would give you a pound to a penny, or a penny to a pound. I always forget which way around that figure of speech is, that anybody who was really throwing around the phrase two-tier policing or two-tier care would be pretty easy to predict their position on everything from Boris Johnson and Brexit right through to Donald Trump. And hypocrisy, as Barry reminds us, doesn't even come close. And I've got that story, the story that just blows, the two-tier policing. None of you have picked up on it as far as I can tell, although my inbox is ticking along quite healthily this morning. I may have missed it. The story that just makes an absolute mockery of the idea that there was any two-tier policing at all this summer. 10:55 is the time. Thank you, Barry. Mo is in Colchester. Mo, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello,
Thanks so much for having me on the call today and the show. Really enjoying it so far.
Good man.
So I'm quite a young individual, and I'm from a British Muslim background. I was born here, and I'm also in the legal field. I'm a solicitor.
Right.
So I feel like I've got a little bit of in-depth information as to what's going on here. And in terms of the police, I think that there's so much that they can do. You know, they're always so overstretched already. There's a lack of funding for them anyways. And it's a case of what can they really do more as of such. And I think we need to examine this on a fundamental basis in terms of the root cause. And I feel like that level of radicalism that's being influencing these people who are doing what they're doing, that's coming from, as you said, social media and the media itself as well.
So radicalising what we might loosely describe as anti-Muslim hatred, which is ignited when somebody who isn't a Muslim commits crimes. People say he is, and the next thing you know, emergency accommodation is on fire.
Exactly. The correlation between the two is just completely ludicrous. And I think that these people need to be described as what they are, and that's radicals, you know.
Radicalisers. They're radical preachers.
Exactly.
And then we go back to our first entry into Idiot's Corner this morning, who used the word radical to describe me. Radical left. No. Somebody saying, if someone punches me in the face, it's not going to hurt more if they are called Mo and they're from Colchester, or if they're called Barry and they're from Ibstock, or if they're called Raymond and they're from Falkirk, who's up next. But this is what the internet trolls are dedicated to, creating the idea that it's not who gets hurt that matters, it's who does the hurting.
Exactly. I mean, I describe myself obviously like as a British Muslim, you know. Yes. My predominant identity, rather than being Pakistani, is that I'm British. I was born here, I went to school here, all my friends are here. And when I hear things, you know, in the media, etc., like this, and when there's incidents like the unfortunate incidents that unfolded in the Southport, you know, I feel with the British community, our hearts hurt for these people, you know. And then when we hear about the riots and things, I think it completely just alienates us. And for me, I felt, you know, in a time where I feel very British, I felt alienated from the rest of the community.
Yes, and
you question your identity.
There's two dimensions to this, and you know, as a white bloke, albeit that having an apostrophe in your name brought you a bit of abuse when the IRA were wreaking havoc in the United Kingdom when I was a child. I do know that loose painting of everybody with the same brush. But there's two dimensions here, because you suffer from prejudice and othering, which is exacerbated when somebody who is from a Muslim background or a Pakistani background, or most commonly both, you get blamed for that. You get roped in to that circle of culpability. But what the summer events, what the Farage riots showed us, was that it doesn't even have to be somebody that you've got shared characteristics with for you to get roped into the circle of culpability. And that seems to me to be quite a new development that probably does lead inexorably back to social media and the things that you're describing, the very deliberate attempts. There are people there that want you to get the blame, that want your life to be diminished, that want Khalid to be worried about coming back from his holidays with his Catholic wife, precisely because the atmosphere of anti-Muslim hatred, people on social media saying burn them all or chuck them all out of the car, all of them, they say, and then wonder why they get their collar felt by the police, albeit that there'll be Daily Telegraph journalists queuing up to buy them a biscuit and pat them on the head. They wonder why they're getting into trouble when they're trying to create an atmosphere in which you get the blame for something in a way that I never, ever, ever could.
No, I completely agree with you, James. But I do think that alongside social media is also the media itself, the news, mainstream news, that needs to be looked at and taken accountability for the fact that the news reports that are coming out a lot of the time, the wording used within them, they are quite alienating towards Muslims. And the fact that if I'm someone who's already a little bit radicalised from what I'm seeing on social media, if I'm seeing some of these
push
headlines,
you the other way, isn't it? Yeah,
exactly. So I just think that the media itself needs to take a little bit of account. There's only a certain amount the police can do as well. And
well, what about that simple question? In conclusion, the simple question of whether, because the two things can be true at the same time, would it have helped to reveal that this bloke was a Welsh-born Christian? Answer, maybe. I'm not sure it would, because the liars would have just told slightly different lies. But at the same time, does that set a hideous precedent? Yes, it does.
I think it does set a hideous precedent, and I think it's the case of if the name was released, I don't think it would have made a massive difference, because there were so many false news circulating. At the end of the day, people believed what they wanted to believe. And
also, it's a foreign-sounding name. So, if you'd been called John Smith, then maybe. I've got to crack on. I'm late for the news. Sorry, Mo. I thank you for that. I may take a couple more calls on this, because, as ever with the conversations that demand some proper thinking and real attempts to understand, I find the curve goes upwards in the course of the hour. My thinking is certainly accelerated and enhanced, but we have got a lot of other stuff to get through. So the sooner we go to the news, the better.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11. Remarkably different levels of coverage for that Liberal Democrat MP denied entry into China and the two Labour MPs who were denied entry into Israel last week. It's almost as if double standards might be in play. I presume Kemi Badenoch has galloped to China's defence and said that China has a right to, quote, control its borders, and sought to blame the failure of Weera Hobhouse to get into Hong Kong to visit her family on Weera Hobhouse, because that's exactly what she did with the two Labour MPs who were denied entry into Israel. She couldn't condemn the MPs quick enough, describing Israel as having a right to, quote, control its borders. Adding it was, quote, significant that there were Labour MPs other countries did not want to let in. I presume that, if she's vaguely consistent, and remember, she never ever commits gaffes. So having galloped to the defence of a country denying entry to her parliamentary colleagues, she has to gallop to the defence of the other country denying entry to her doesn't she? To her parliamentary colleagues? I'll leave you to ask her if you get the chance. And I completely forgot to share with you the story that punches all sorts of holes in the ludicrous and often racist adjacent claim that there was any form of two-tier policing during the Farage riots last summer. You haven't got it. I'm going to leave it hanging, but I will not go home without telling you, because I want to move on to something else now. It's really interesting. I had a conversation. Actually, when I'm on the subject of conversations, I mentioned in the last hour that I'd been in Ireland at the weekend. Can I just give a shout out to Keith, who is not you, no, not you. Calm down. Another Keith, who was quite young actually, but it's a more common name in Ireland. Keith, who was the guide on the Viking Splash Tour that you can get on opposite the Shelbourne Hotel in Dublin, and I didn't have any cash on me. I don't carry cash, although cash is more commonplace in Dublin than it is in London. So I couldn't tip him when we got off the Viking Splash Tour. Those used to have them in London until I think something went a bit wrong. But the safety levels in the Dublin tour were very high. And you go on the roads, and he gives you a brilliant tour of Ireland. I learned so much about Dublin. Did you have any idea how much of Ireland is essentially rooted in Viking invasion? How much of it, including up to and including almost all the place names, and then you go into the water. So you're the same vehicle. It's an amphibious vehicle. But Keith was one of the best tour guides, and I go on quite a lot of tours, especially when the kids were younger. All four of us were on this one, and we absolutely loved it. And he is, I presume he's a stand-up as well. I dropped a couple of hints, but if he isn't, he flipping well should be. Absolute genius. So if you get the chance to go on those Viking Splash tours next time you're in Dublin, then do please try to. Well, I don't want to do down any of his colleagues, but he's the one I have had experience of, and he was absolutely brilliant. Like the London Duck Tour, but in Dublin, with lots of Viking sort of side order. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. Some breaking news for you. The former Conservative MP Craig Williams and 14 others have been charged with gambling offences following an investigation into bets placed on the timing of the 2024 general election, according to the Gambling Commission. God, that feels like a different age, doesn't it? Do you remember I told you we had a lad here on work experience? He was a bit more senior, wasn't he, than work experience? Really one of those lads who you encounter and you think, God, you'll be running the place one day. And he had contacts. I won't go into any further detail. He told me that they were going to announce the election, and he told me when it was going to be. And he was absolutely right, but he was on work experience, so I completely ignored him. So it meant that there were people gossiping about it in and around Rishi Sunak, and or possibly it meant that. We'll have to wait and see, but that's the story this refers to. And that charges have now been brought, so we will not say another word about it. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. Teachers. I was talking with some 16-year-olds this weekend, and I was really struck by something that I have never been struck by before. And that was this. They considered teaching to be an almost unbearable job. One of them was the child of a teacher, and the other two 16-year-olds were very good friends of the one whose parent is a teacher. And I'd never seen it from that end of the telescope. They weren't necessarily talking about their own teachers, although one of them was talking about their mum. But these 16-year-olds perceived teaching as an almost unbearable job. One of them was reflecting upon the time that their parent broke up for 2 weeks and said he'd never really seen his parent like that before, just sort of overcome with emotion, so desperate to get to the finish line that the toll, the stress of the job had never really hit home in that way before. I pronounce gambling wrong, don't I? I stick an extra syllable in it. Everyone else says gambling, and I say gambling. Is that a Birmingham? Is that a West Midlands thing? Is that a Black Country? Is that a Kidderminster? I don't know, but I digress. Because then I turned the page of one newspaper this morning and came across this story. Stress is taking an, quotes, immense toll, end quotes, on the lives of teachers in England, with only 1.5%. I'll say that again, 1.5% of teachers in schools unaffected by the high levels of strain that plague their colleagues. So it's not necessarily that everybody is suffering from the highest levels of strain, but even the teachers who aren't are going to be affected by the suffering of their colleagues. The National Education Union has revealed that 1 in 3 teachers in state schools are stressed at work for at least 4/5 of the time, while only a tiny fraction say they are never overstretched. I bet they're PE teachers. The research has been published as the union gathers for its annual conference in Harrogate this week, and 14,000 teachers were surveyed, a majority of whom said that they have frequently cancelled plans with family and friends. They have to work in the evenings and on weekends to catch up. And even the long holidays are not all that they are cracked up to be, with 1 in 3 teachers saying they always had to deal with work during the holidays as well. But this is the line I want you to focus on. You feel exhausted all the time and guilty for sacrificing your own family time. It is not a profession which allows you to have a life outside of work, and it is mentally draining and detrimental to your mental and physical health. And if you've got a 16-year-old telling you that their parent is almost in pieces by the time the end of term comes around, then you know you've got a problem. So what way do we find into this story? I think 2 ways. The first question is going to seem a little obvious, but it's obvious to you because you're a teacher. It's not obvious to me because I'm not. Why is it so bad? Why is teaching such a stressful job? And it isn't going to be an easy calculation. You can't just say the children, because it will only be some children. The system, the structure in the school, the curriculum. Why? Because it was not always like this. If stress in teaching were a graph, it would have got steeper and steeper and steeper in all the years that I've been doing this job, in all the years that I've been on the radio. I know, don't waste 10pence texting me to tell me that all jobs are stressful or that you're stressed as well. There is something uniquely important about teaching. It's why fascists are always so quick to attack educators. Without teaching, you have a population that is likely to vote against its own interests or fall for the lies of demagogues. Without teaching, you have people unintroduced to the power of empathy, or unable sometimes to imagine what it might be like to walk a mile in another person's shoes. And that's on the humanities side of things. On the science and technology and math side of things, without good teaching, you have a population that is not equipped for economic growth. You have a population that is unable to solve complicated problems. Teaching is, for my money, the most important profession in any society. Without teachers, what are we? I'm not sure teaching as a profession and teachers as individuals have ever been more devalued and denigrated than they are today. Think about the ease with which, and when I say the usual suspects, you know I'm talking about the people who told you that we couldn't punish the bankers for the global financial crisis caused by the bankers, that austerity was the correct response, that Boris Johnson would be a brilliant prime minister, that Brexit would be really good for Britain, that Liz Truss was an economic genius, that Donald Trump derangement syndrome meant that people were exaggerating just how awful Donald Trump would be for world peace and international economy. So when I say the usual suspects, you know who I'm talking about. Pretty much the only time the usual suspects talk about teachers is either when a right-wing newspaper has got hold of a story about parents who've made a nuisance of themselves being disciplined or punished by the school, or when they go on strike. It's the only time you ever hear some people talking about teachers is when they actually go on strike in order to improve the terms and conditions that have currently created an environment in which stress levels are at the highest they've ever been. So why the hell would they go on strike? Answer, their jobs are almost unbearable. So question number one, why? 0345 6060 973. And I know you might not want to think about work while you're on your Easter holidays, but this is your opportunity to tell the rest of the world what you and your colleagues know to be true. Why is it so awful? Stressful. It might not be awful. You might love it. You might get moments of absolute brilliance. But the stress is now at levels that you never thought possible. Why is teaching in 2025 so stressful? All right, 0345 6060 973. And then, as Andrew has already texted, apropos, I did it for 30 years. It's altered my life, mostly negatively. You become the backstop for a broken society. That is a heartbreaking sentence to read for anybody who believes, as I do, that teaching is the most important profession in any population, in any society. So perhaps the question of why allows us to dig a little deeper, to just move a little further. Why is teaching so stressful? And then the second question becomes, what has changed? What shall we say? Since 1997? Education. So since 1997 or since 2010? Oh, well, you tell me. It depends on how long your career is. So in the course of your career, what has changed? So let's pin down why is teaching so stressful? And let's work out what has changed. In fact, you know how I wang on about Rosetta Stones and skeleton keys? That's a pretty, I would believe we've not picked up on that before. That's a pretty good one too, right? That's a, so why? And then what has changed? How many subjects could we break down according to that simple template for radio phone-in magic? Why is something happening? And what has changed to create the circumstances or to create the thing that's happening? Why are stress levels so high? And what has changed to make them thus? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973. And remember, if you write to me, 84850, or the same number actually, but for WhatsApp to send me a message, and you don't want me to read out your name, just to be 100% safe, put at the top of the message that you don't. I've already got 4 in my inbox. Put at the top of the message that you don't want me to read. So please don't read out my name, because I can sometimes see your name if you're on WhatsApp. It's programmed, isn't it, into the app, and so I'll be able to see your name at the bottom of the message, which means if I read it and don't notice earlier when I get to the end and it says please don't read out my name at the end, I've already read it out, and I've already, because I can see it at the bottom of the message, I've already read out your name. Which means I should probably give a shout out to the racist who's been texting me all morning using the name Big Cole. Because, mate, you're on WhatsApp and I've got your Christian name and your surname in front of me, and neither of them are Colin. And I could, of course, read them out now, but I won't because I'm nice.
James O'Brien on LBC.
19 minutes after 11. You haven't asked me not to read your name out, but you're only 16, so I won't. This one got me. I am 16 and I've just heard you talking about teachers. My mum is a teacher in reception and year 4, and I have never seen her so ill, writes a loving daughter. And that's why I went in where I went in on this subject this morning, with my shock at hearing 16-year-olds talk about teaching as a profession and a teacher, as in one of their parents, and describing just how hard it was, to see how hard it was for them. So why is it so hard? Why is it so stressful in 2025? And what has changed? 0345 6060 973. You're a lovely daughter. That's really nice of you to have said that. I hope your mum's listening, even though I haven't said your name out loud. Rita is in Maidenhead. Rita, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there, James. Hello. Actually, this really resonates with me, and I actually feel quite tearful and quite emotional just listening to you. This is my 30th year of teaching, and in December I left my full-time role, and now I'm supplying, which is much better.
Right.
But actually really depressing when I see the situation out there. But I had a chat with my 19-year-old who's doing psychology and my 21-year-old who sat me down last year, and they said, Mum, this has got to stop. And they broke my heart, actually. They said, we have not had you at home. Every Sunday, we know that you were desperate for Dad to take us out so that you could sit on your computer and work. You used to get really ratty in the evenings because you just wanted to make us dinner, and you just wanted that dishwasher on, and you would be screaming and yelling so that you could get on with your schoolwork until late hours. And that is all true. It is all true. You never took us to any football matches. You never took us to our hockey teams because you always had your excuse of working. And it's true. Dad always took us everywhere. Dad did this. But they weren't criticising. They just said, but now you have to look at your life and what you've done with it. And they said, this is making you sick. Working in schools can be very toxic. And I think people don't tell you this, James.
I think you're right.
The paperwork is immense. The pressure, the targets, the performance management is so intense. It's a real kind of tier system. You've got the one head at the top, you've got the deputy at the top. It becomes competitive. If you aren't performing, I tell you, they make your life a misery. And if your team is not performing, they make your life a misery to make sure that your team, the data, everything is driven by Ofsted and data. And what anyone ever tells you, they do care about Ofsted, even though, we know about the head teacher who sadly, tragically had passed away. But schools are still putting on pressure all the time. And I had last year my head teacher giving me extra paperwork, unnecessary. I contacted the union. They said this is unnecessary. PowerPoint.
If the head teacher was here, and I said, why did you do that? And you're referring, of course, to Ruth Perry, which was a horrible story, heartbreaking story. If your head teacher was here and I said, why did you give her that extra paperwork? What do you think the head teacher would say, if that's not a silly question?
I was preparing them for Ofsted. I wanted them to feel confident to be able to talk to Ofsted. I think I'm confident. I know my job. But the amount of hours that we do, and people don't tell you this, there is no money, so you buy resources. I was buying resources. I was buying Play-Doh. I was making Play-Doh. All the ingredients you require to make Play-Doh, taking it in, sharing it with my team. The amount of stuff that you do. I gave so much of my time, and we all do this. All the teachers do this. We give our time. It's genuinely because we are thinking about the well-being of the children and the experiences.
Not about the well-being of yourself. And how extraordinary that it took your own children to point out just how damaging this cycle had become. I don't know if you heard the quote from one of the teachers surveyed for this research. You feel exhausted all the time and guilty for sacrificing your own family time. It is not a profession which allows you to have a life outside of work. When did it change, Rita? When did it start changing? Or when did you notice, looking back, how much it had changed?
I think in the last 10, 15 years, I've had teachers coming in and younger teachers, NQTs or ECTs, what they're now called, they would come in and say, gosh, this is really difficult, and then this is really hard. And they would say, yeah, but it gets easier, doesn't it? No. I'm telling you now. It does. I'm on 29th here, and I'm telling you, I'm doing more than I ever did before. And James, this is before we had computers. I would plan lessons on an A3 piece of paper with a ruler and a pen, and you rule it off, and then you put your days of the week in, and then you put your differentiation, whatever you're going to be doing for the course of the week, your schemes of work, everything done on paper, and old stuff. now we're talking things should be easier, should they not? We've got AI.
Yes, they should. I mean, it's interesting you say 10 to 15 years, because, of course, Michael Gove became Secretary of State for Education exactly 15 years ago, and he stayed there for 4. So it's not all bad news then, Rita, because he's got a seat in the House of Lords of Rishi Sunak. So, there's something that we can all celebrate.
This weekend. But I'm going to say something. The best time of my life, the best teaching times in a very, very difficult school, inner city London, when I first became a teacher, and it was phenomenal. I worked so hard. I know I worked hard. We were there for hours on end, but it was a Labour government and we worked under Labour. And honestly, the amount of money, resources we had more resources, we had more facilities, we had more people in place. Now, all we're doing is cutting. It's not just resources, we're cutting humans.
Yes,
so if we haven't got TAs anymore,
we
haven't got TAs, so how am I going to get...
And that adds all of the stress, all of this exacerbates stress. You feel a bit like a pressure cooker that someone's just loosened the lid on, Rita. I'm sorry you haven't got anyone else you can talk to about this, because I need to crack on. But goodness me, you've covered all of the bases so far, and it's systemic, you see. Other people may mention children being more badly behaved than they used to be, or COVID hangouts, but the system is what determines whether or not you can deal with variables, whether or not you can deal with the unexpected. And it sounds, by Rita's testimony, and indeed by the findings of this research undertaken for the National Education Union, that the system is not fit for purpose. And as perhaps you'd expect, my inbox is absolutely buzzing with this. 27 minutes after 11 is the time. Nick is in Southampton. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hi there. So I'm a school leader and probably one of these senior leaders who kind of keep pushing staff to keep driving up standards.
Sure.
And I have been involved in Teach First and several large academy chains, and I do believe in high teacher accountability.
Yeah.
But I think your point about systems is really, really important. It's really common at the moment that we had 10% of our staff off on long-term sick, some for physical and some for mental, and that has knock-on effects for other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's systemic across all schools, because we've got a teacher recruitment crisis, and we don't know, all the national training organisations are all missing their targets. So this is only going to get exacerbated. And no one
listening to Rita a moment ago is going to be sitting there thinking, maybe I'll have a go at teaching. No. Maybe I will apply for my PGCE.
Exactly. And I used to take, when I first got into training, teacher training, when I said jokingly to people, or other teachers said, don't become a teacher. I was like, how can we be advocates of our own profession if we're telling young people, don't become a teacher? But I think the other thing which was during COVID, when all the schools shut, there was a phenomenal opportunity there to modernise the system. Because the other thing is we can't take time out of our day to go and do simple things like doctor's appointments. I've got 2 young children. My next door neighbour works from home on a regular basis. He can do school drop-offs. He can do a pickup. That flexibility that we look across to our peers in other professions just doesn't exist. And schools are quite antiquated in that sense.
And so if you had more bodies, you'd have more flexibility. So for you, a lot of these roads lead back to the recruitment crisis and schools operating at less than the full complement. And of course, that is part of the reason why almost all of the teachers quizzed describe themselves as affected by the high stress levels, even if it's their colleagues' high stress levels. Because if a colleague is signed off sick due to having had a breakdown or being unable to properly function, then the rest of the teaching body has to move to fill that gap in some way if there isn't a supply teacher available, or if there isn't a new teacher on the horizon.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. But I do think that modernising of the approach to teaching, this idea of being able to, I don't know, if you're not teaching lessons, not have to be on site, and the attitudes to working from home. And, there are very few schools which do that. There are a few. I've got colleagues who work in... Pardon?
Do you do these things as a school leader?
No.
Why not? Because you're not allowed to, or because the governors wouldn't be keen, or?
I mean,
I don't want to embarrass you. I don't want to put you in a tricky situation. But it's a bit rum when a leader can't lead in the way that a leader wants to lead. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yes, but I think it's... I think we're part of an academy chain that would probably.
So you have pretty rigid systems in place, pretty rigid rules in place. Final question: the biggest thing that's changed in the course of your 15 years teaching?
I think for the moment is the because it's always been hardworking. It's always been working through holidays. For me, I've never known the number of people who are leaving the profession. Yeah. So I know people who are young, who've got young families, are taking pay cuts to leave the profession.
And that's chicken and egg.
That's the biggest thing that I fear. And I talk to all my peers at other schools, and they're like, "How can we get out? How can we get out?"
Well, that's chicken and egg, because the stress is causing people to leave, and people leaving is causing stress. It's making your job harder and the job of the people left behind much harder. I mean, again, how many times do we sit here reflecting upon how broken everything is, largely as a consequence of Tory party policy or of 14 years of austerity or of Michael Gove? Many, many teachers tell me. It doesn't mean it's 100% true, but the notion of root and branch transformation being necessary, because, as I said at the outset, if you're not looking after your teachers, then you're not looking after your children. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34, and I don't know if it's quite the right word to use to say I love it when we do this, but you know how many times I've said to you that the reason why I still love coming to work every day is because you're never finished. You're never the finished article. How many times have we talked about how tough teaching is? How many times have we talked about teaching? But we're not a traditional radio phone-in. We don't really confine our conversations about teachers to attacking them when they go on strike, and then perhaps 6 months later, or even 6 weeks later, doing a phone-in wondering why children are now so rude to teachers. Oh, good. Let me have a little think about that. So I was being driven to school by my dad the other day, and a bloke on the radio was attacking teachers for going on strike, calling them all sorts of names, claiming that they had a really easy life, that they had incredibly long holidays. And then when I got to school, I hopped out of the car, I gave my dad a kiss goodbye, I went into school, and I was really, really rude to my teacher. Can anybody see any links there? Can anybody see possibly a little bit of cause and effect kicking in there once again? I don't know. So we're not a traditional radio phone-in show in that we don't only talk about teaching when we are either attacking teachers for taking industrial action or wondering why, in a world where it is perfectly reasonable for grown-up commentators and broadcasters and columnists to attack teachers on a daily basis, children no longer have respect for teachers. We do things a little bit differently, but we've never done it like this before, and that's what I mean. That's what I mean. I've never thought of it from the child of the teacher's point of view. That's what got Anita. That's what made her ring in, because she'd had the same conversation with her children. And the 16-year-old, whose name I haven't shared, we're really worried about her mum, who teaches reception and year 4, not necessarily the stages that you'd think would be most stressful. And this, hello, my mum teaches in a primary school where she's been for the past 30 years. The stress that the school is putting her under and the lack of support is shocking. Resources are extremely limited. She's currently expected to teach a small group of children who are behind in their speech and language in a busy, loud corridor. These are children who are easily distracted and have additional needs. Parents are still sending their children to school in nappies, which teachers are expected to change, and that can take away a huge proportion of their day as they have to completely rechange them. Schools need more support, more bodies, yes, but there's also a need for parents to ensure that children have the basic skills to get themselves dressed and be toilet trained. You do hear these stories, and they are about social change. They are in some ways about post-COVID gaps in basic knowledge, basic learning, but it should matter to everybody. It should matter to everyone. I mean, you'd be looking at a 4-day week if you had any sense at all to make life easier for these people, but how much harder would that make running a school? I do not know. Joanne is in Sunderland. Joanne, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Joanne.
Hi, yes. This is my 29th year.
That's 2. I've had 2 teachers the 29th year. It must be something in the water. Go on.
And I intend to go in 3 years' time.
Okay.
So at the age of 55, I'm going to seek early retirement because I'm going to be honest with you, I can't take it much more.
Oh, dear.
I'm really lucky. I work in a gorgeous little school. My executive head is wonderful. She's the same age as me, so she gets it. But my job is pretty unsustainable at the minute.
Really?
So I teach 2 days in year 6, which is the best part of my week. I adore it. I love it. But the rest of the time, I'm also head of school. So I've got that. I'm also designated safeguarding lead. I'm also responsible for special educational needs, which is off the chart.
Yeah.
And I'm also responsible for maths. So my job's massive. Yeah. And like someone said to us not long ago, like, how do you do it? And if I sat down and thought about it, I'd probably cry. But I do it because the children need us. However, I have 2 children who also need their mum.
We've never found our way into this side of the story before. And it must be weird for you to hear your life being reflected on the radio and thinking about the 2 children in your life, the 2 cohorts of children, the ones that are yours and the ones that are yours but not yours.
Yeah. And I think that's the hard thing. I think, workload has always been phenomenal. It's always been massive. Pressure has always been massive. You know, there's never been a time in my teaching career where I haven't not woken up in the middle of the night and thought about this, thought about that, thought about the other. Yeah. I have had 2 breakdowns. I'm very open. Dear. I'm very open about my mental health and the struggles that I've had.
Yes.
But I think that makes us a better teacher. And a better leader.
Being open about it does. I mean, I'd rather you hadn't had them, obviously, Joanne.
Me too. Me too.
But being open. I mean, not being open about it just tightens the lid down on the things that caused it, doesn't it?
Oh, sometimes. I'm massively open. You know, good, like I say to my class, who were only 10 and 11, look, you wouldn't think it, but I get very anxious, and they're like, look at me going, how the heck do you get anxious?
If Miss gets anxious, then maybe it's okay for me to talk about getting anxious.
Yeah. I'm also a mental health lead as well. Wow. But, like, I think the big change for me, and it's very hard to pinpoint it down because funding is a huge issue, like off-the-chart issue. As Senko, I cannot help the children I want to help because there is not the money there. I mean, the current wait list for SIPs is 75 weeks. And that is for diagnostic and for mental health.
Good Lord.
So, 75 weeks.
And you're having to improvise in the meantime. You're having to still look after these children, but without the diagnosis or the responses that would help them and you most.
Yeah, we've got a school counsellor 1 day a week, and we've also just been getting additional support from the NHS. Yeah. But I think for me, the biggest change has been since COVID, and I hate to say it because I am one, but parents demanding everything to be now. And I'm not saying all parents. I want to make that absolutely
clear. It's like
clear.
all children. It doesn't take a whole class of children to make your life a nightmare. It takes 1 or 2 children. And the same with parents. It doesn't take 30. Yeah. It takes 1 or 2 to be...
Yeah.
So the entitlement, this idea that you answer to them.
Yeah, I mean, I said to the lovely lady I spoke to just there that when I was first out of, brand new, shiny teacher, dead excited, if anyone had been a tinker, I would, go up to the parents, they've not had such a good day and whatever, and then that parent would say to the child, what you been doing? Yeah. Now, there are parents who I'm frightened. I get really anxious about calling because I know it's my fault.
What do we think? What have we got any theories on what's changed there? Why that pendulum has swung?
I honestly don't know. I think COVID was a massive. I don't know, as a teacher, teachers bang on about COVID pre and post, but I think that did change things dramatically because, I was acting head when COVID hit, and we went from a full school to a online school within a day with no guidance. But that's another phone call for another day, James. I think. But,
yes, it is.
I could rattle on about that for hours. But I think that's a big change. Most of our parents are lush and they're dead supportive, and I get on really well building relationships. But I think. I feel bad that I can't give their bairns the help they need because I don't have the capacity to do it, and then I feel like I'm letting them down and letting the bairn down.
That adds to your anxieties and adds to your. So are you doing it? Forgive me if this sounds patronising, but are you doing a better? Well, I haven't said it yet. It might be really patronising.
I've got thick skin, James. I've been teaching nearly 30 years.
Yeah, and that is roughly where I'm about to move. Because are you looking after yourself as well? I know you've got your eyes on the finish line, but are you Can you find time to look after yourself a bit better?
I'll tell you where I am now.
Go on.
I take myself out for a walk, so I'm currently on the seafront in Sunderland, looking at the sea.
God.
So I do try and look after myself, but the problem is like by the time I go in, I'm not shattered.
Of course.
But I do, I sing in a choir once a week. I try and do bits for myself.
Good.
But yeah, I'm quite excited for 3 years' time.
I can see you are, and I'm not even going to ask what it would take to keep you in the job, because I think you've earned a rest, you've earned your retirement. And
that's exactly what my son said to us. He went, "Mum, you've done your time." I went, "I know." I know.
Can I say something quickly?
Yeah.
Which is that you've done so much important work. I hope you don't let the current difficulties and the stresses and even the breakdowns to ever dilute the enormous pride you should take in the... I mean, just in this call, I can tell that you're amazing, that you're a brilliant communicator, that you really look after your children. And that means there'll be thousands over 30 years who've benefited from it.
It is. It's scary, man. It's scary.
And without you, their lives would have been less.
Thank you.
Wow.
I do need to remember that, but, just ending on a light note, the worst thing is when if you do get ever a night out and someone taps you on the shoulder in the pub and goes, "Aye, miss," and you think, "Oh, hell, it's time to leave now." That's enough.
Can you do me one favour?
Yeah, I will,
Can you just say lush again?
Lush.
It's you take care. Thank you, Joanne. Enjoy your break. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12 minutes to 12. I wish you could see my inbox, Joanne. I know it wouldn't persuade you to stay in the profession where you've clearly done so much good, but there's an awful lot of love for you there, not just for the way you pronounce lush. You've got to be careful when you do this for a living, because everyone in Sunderland talks like that, or almost everyone in Sunderland talks like that. But when you're in this sort of little Westminster bubble, what do we call it? The Watford, what's it called? The London bubble, or you're south of the Watford Gap. Luckily, having grown up in Kidderminster, I don't necessarily get like some Londoners do about regional accents. But I just thought that use of lush was particularly lovely. So I allowed myself a moment. 11:48 is the time. Why is teaching so stressful? There is no easy answer to that question. But as ever, resources are going to be an absolutely huge part of it. And clientele, whether it is children arriving at school unable to do things that really should have been drilled into them by now, or not even drilled into them, they should have been helped to be able to do by now, and then parents who are increasingly entitled. It seems like every day there's a picture of some hatchet-faced parent in the newspaper who's phoned up the media in order to get their child's school into trouble, and you sort of think two things. Number one, oh dear, why would you do that? Number two, or smile, possibly. And then number two is the poor child. Some of these cases, of course, will be valid, but generally speaking, how can you prioritise your own petty problems over your child's happiness? The people who are looking after your children are going to do a much better job of looking after your children if they feel cherished, valued and supported. There'll be some wrong-uns. There are in every profession. There are rumours. There are even some radio presenters who aren't very nice, but I personally find that impossible to believe. But generally speaking, the more cherished, the more supported, the more appreciated teachers feel, the happier your children's school days will be and the better educated they will be. But hey-ho, you have a row and phone up the Daily Telegraph to tell them about how you're the real victim here. 10 to 12 is the time. Mark is in Huddersfield. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Nice to speak to you.
Likewise.
I had a bit of a lump in my throat listening to Joanne then, because I work with people, head teachers like Joanne, every day. I used to be a teacher. I was a head teacher, and now I support head teachers. And the everything she said it sums up the fact that teaching is it's not just a job.
Yeah,
it's a vocation.
Exactly.
And you want to do the right thing for your kids, and it is now in a state, and I can kind of trace it back to three specific things: austerity, social media, and COVID.
Talk me through social media first. I can sort of work the other two out.
Well, when I started teaching in 2003, social media wasn't really a thing. There was, I suppose, it was pre-Facebook. Facebook came along a wee bit later. There was MySpace, Friends Reunited, which caused some interesting breakdowns in relationships. But the way in which now social media is a platform for people to undermine what schools do, to share information and misinformation.
Oh, of course,
and it's the same. It links back to the first conversation you were having this morning about the way in which people are empowered in echo chambers.
Yeah.
And feel that it is now their absolute right to tell schools and teachers and head teachers how it's going to be. And
of course they become a self-selecting sample, don't they? Because if I've stumbled across something like that when we're in school, I'd have run a mile in the opposite direction. So these people either go unchallenged or they attract like-minded troublemakers.
Yeah, and you alluded to it before. I always call it, when I'm working with heads, about the reality of how many people have it in for them, which is a commonly held perception that it's the 5%ers.
Yeah.
You only need 5% of a class, a school, a group of parents, a country to cause serious damage, because it takes real courage and resources to stand up to the very worst of us.
So I get that. I hadn't thought of that before, but I mean, then you've got the WhatsApp groups, the Facebook pages, just didn't exist when I was at school. They barely existed when my children were at primary school, but now everywhere you go is a platform for abusing somebody else, isn't it?
And the kids have access to it as well. You know, the fact that it goes home and the problems become exacerbated and they grow and become something they never needed to be. Because there's no switch off. When you and I were at school, you went home and that was that.
Oh,
you didn't get the... Well, no, you didn't. You went to the dorm. No, that's a fair point.
Still in therapy, mate. Like still in therapy, mate. But it gives me unique insight. So what worries me, and I usually save this question until the end of hours like this one, is I can't really... What's the light at the end of the tunnel? What does improvement look like? Apart from, here's a massive check for the entire system. We're just going to hire loads more people.
It has to be. It has to start there, but it has to be spent in a way which does what Sure Start used to do, in supporting parents at the very beginning of their child's life, not in an invasive way, in a supportive way. I think it's one of the greatest social crimes ever committed in this country was to get rid of Sure Start.
I would agree with you on that. I mean, there was some chatter at the time about how it was being disproportionately accessed by middle-class mums who possibly didn't need it, which I dispute on two levels. The first being who defines what need is, and number two, disproportionate doesn't mean that the people who arguably need it more aren't accessing it. I mean, there was no downside to Sure Start. No, and of course, Michael Gove is heading into the House of Lords. So I get that. That's austerity. That's part of austerity. You've explained social media perfectly. Just give me a quick thumbnail sketch of why COVID has made everything worse.
Well, my specialism is primary school. And so if you consider that children born in 2020, maybe 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds in 2020, they experienced 2 years of either no or interrupted early education in terms of socialisation with other children, in terms of what their parents were able to do, because socialisation as a parent is massively important. And just all of the things that children learn at that age, as anybody who homeschooled will know, you need expertise in order to educate and in order to provide opportunities to learn. And loads of parents did an amazing job. There was a lot of resource out there online to be able to support, but again, it only needs the 5%, and it really is an awful lot more than the 5%, because I look at kids coming into school now in reception classes, dummies, nappies, pre-verbal.
And this if Sure Start, well, I suppose Sure Start during lockdown would have been tricky, but they go hand in hand, these two things, don't they, in a way? The help in understanding what being a parent means. It's not something that necessarily comes innately or naturally. You need a little bit of guidance. It used to come from your own mum, or it used to come from society, and then Sure Start, whereas now lockdown just cut people off from all of the support structures that would once have been part of their parental education process.
And they've never been replaced. I'm a father of a 3-year-old, and I'm from an education background. It's really, really hard work. It's being a parent, and it's there are books, but they don't necessarily apply to you. I wonder
what. Actually, here's a thing politically, Mark. I've never thought about this before, but the government, if it were minded to bring back Sure Start, widely regarded as a big success, I wonder whether that is diluted. If there was a determination to do that, it would be diluted by the knowledge that a subsequent government could just pull it out again, and all of the. I don't know, but there you go. There's something you might get Bridget Phillipson to focus on. Bring back a version of, or a replacement, or a like-for-like swap for Sure Start, because that would deal with arguably all of the points. Maybe not social media, but it would deal with at least two of the points that Mark points to as the key reasons, the key drivers of the change that has created a profession in which the stress levels are off the scale. Thank you, Mark. And you can tell that most of the callers I've had today would not have been able to ring me during term time, can't you? Because they'd barely have the time. Sandra's in Warwick. Probably the last word on this. Sandra, what would you like to say?
So, hi, Mark. Nice to speak to you.
That's okay.
I'm an assistant head teacher at a secondary school, and I've taught here in the UK for 18 years. I taught in Canada for a few years before that.
Okay.
And just the pull that I see on teachers, my job is being in charge of data for my school, and the pull that teachers have with this extreme level of accountability, keeping in mind that teaching is a vocation, and all of the teachers that we have, they're there for such genuine reasons. They care deeply about the children, wanting them to do well, and they give everything they have towards doing that. And then at the same time, to have these impossible targets that they just can't reach, and parents who there's no support, there's no money. I think it's just an impossible task to be successful at.
Wow. So you describe a frog that's been boiled. This has been very incremental. It wasn't the case when you started, but it's so clearly the case now. Can you identify a pivot point? Can you identify either a moment, a movement, or an engine of change that really brought home to you that you were heading over the ridge, as it were? You were perhaps reaching the point of no return, either as an individual or as a profession.
Like my daughter the other day, who's 8 years old, she turned around to me and she said to me, and she's only 8, she said, "Mommy, I hate your job. I hate it. It's not fair."
Oh,
and
wow.
it brought me to tears, because
of course it did.
I know that we're all in the same position, and we're all giving our all to all these children, and then our own families are just so affected by it. I can't make it to any of their sport events. I can't make it to any of their events at school. I can't make it to anything. And yeah, it's
just
impossible.
Remembered something really weird, actually, which didn't really register with me at the time. But a pal of mine whose wife is a teacher. It was a family wedding on a Friday.
Yeah.
No chance. I said, where is she? And he said, no chance.
No, I mean, it's the running joke. You look around and, what does your mom never come to any events? Where is she? Oh, well, my mommy's a teacher.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
What are you going to do?
I don't know. I don't think there are a lot of options. Just get on with it, do the best I can, hope for better.
I'm sorry for your little girl, Sandra. That's a brutal story that you tell. But thank you for sharing it, and thank you for doing what you do. Thank you to all the teachers, the ones that rang in, the ones that have texted, and of course, all of the countless ones that haven't. I'm lucky to have your company this week, as you have, I was going to say time off. Perhaps at 11 o'clock this morning would have said time off, but I don't think there'll be many people who aren't doing any work, even while they are ostensibly on holiday. That it's funny how it happens. I'm sorry to bang on about that element of my job, but that idea of coming at it from the teacher's children's point of view was a real way of loosening the bonds of the stories, wasn't it? A real interesting way of humanising a conversation that can sometimes be a little bit anodyne. It's just gone 12 noon. I've got a few contenders for what we're going to do next, one of which is utterly ridiculous, and that's the one I'm leaning towards.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12 is the time. I think it is the cousin of the radio phone-in. It's never actually occurred to me before. It's not quite the territory it used to be, but the letters page of a national newspaper can be the place where you get a real multiplicity of perspectives. You get people disagreeing on a major issue of the moment. You get anecdotes, you get insights, you get observations about our shared society. I used to read the letters pages religiously. I used to read the Times and the Telegraph letters pages religiously. I'm not sure when I stopped. Probably Brexit, actually. Just they stopped being places where you've got a multiplicity of perspectives. But the Guardian's letters page today is an absolute classic of the genre. I wonder if you can guess what the subject matter is if I read out a few choice paragraphs or sentences. I'll read out a few choice sentences. So, writes Nick Greasley from Teddington, so I did what we all do and sat and stewed in silence. I do regret not asking, and am filled with the same sense of wonder and disgust every time I'm in this situation on a train or a bus. What do you think he is reflecting upon when he describes himself as doing what we all do and sitting and stewing in silence? Other correspondents take up a theme, but it probably makes it a little bit easier to work out what it is. This is nothing, writes Carol, compared with my experiences in the Royal Brompton Hospital in London. Patients next to me were doing it as I was recovering from a triple heart bypass operation. Not doing it. Doing it. That's going to distract you from your recuperation or your recovery, isn't it? My favourite interjection, writes Gregory, occurred on the Docklands Light Railway when I loudly suggested to my wife, in an imaginary conversation, that she should put the dog in the oven. At least it gave me pleasure. What on earth is he going on about? Having an imaginary conversation with his wife from the Docklands Light Railway in which he encourages her to put the dog in the oven. Well, he at least is providing an answer to a question posed by the one and only Adrian Chiles. If Adrian Chiles didn't exist, I think we'd have to invent him. The man is just magnificent, and he's achieved something I aspire to. He's a few years older than me. We grew up just a few miles apart, you know. Very, very much a West Midlands lad. He grew up in Hagley, which is 2 stops on from Kidderminster. Special prize if you know what the station is in between Hagley and Kidderminster. I don't know what the prize is, but that would be niche knowledge. Oh, speaking of Kidderminster, Ashley Hemmings got his 4th hat-trick of the season on Saturday against Curzon Ashton. So do you know how many hat-tricks Alan Shearer got during Newcastle United's title-winning season? Yeah, 5. Ashley Hemmings has got 4. And there's still 3 games left. It's getting extremely tight at the top of the National League North, with Scunthorpe 1 point ahead of us, but lagging quite far behind on goal difference, and Brackley, who are perennial losers in the playoffs. I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that we went up as a consequence of beating them, I'd almost feel sorry for them. But they're now in 3rd and looking, well, same as us on points. 2nd and 3rd are the same on points, and number 1 is 1 point ahead. So if you like your football exciting, it's like Rory McIlroy levels of excitement at the top of the National League North. But I digress. It's not Bewdley, David. Nice guess. There's no railway station in Bewdley. Luke knows. I hope you didn't look it up. Paul knows. It's Blakedown. And I shall. Yes, that's a very good point that you make, actually, Ryrie. I should do the hook and tease from the first hour. Keith, will you remind me before the end of this hour to do the hook and tease that I was supposed to do before the end of the first hour? The one that explains why all talk of 2-tier policing in the context. Yeah, that one, yeah. Thank you. And then finally from Natalie in the Guardian's letters, but it's something I have noticed even in the streets. It's something I have noticed even in the streets. So what could it be? Here we go. Point 1. So I did what we all do and sat and stewed in silence. I do regret not asking and am filled with the same sense of wonder and disgust every time I'm in this situation on a bus or train. Natalie says, it's something I have noticed even in the streets. What could it be? And then we have Gregory pointing out that his favourite interjection occurred on the Docklands Light Railway when he loudly suggested to his wife in an imaginary conversation that she should put the dog in the oven. What could unite all of these points? And last but by no means least, Carol, it happened to Carol, in the Royal Brompton Hospital in London when she was recovering from a triple heart bypass operation. So what do you think people are discussing here? What do you think the subject matter is? They didn't win sorry. I meant Blackburn Rovers when they won the title. Alan Shearer got 5. That's rubbing it in, isn't it? I'd love it if we beat Liverpool. I'd love it. Gone very niche now. Let me steer the conversation back to the subject hand in matter, because what Adrian Chiles wrote about was something that I know Sheila has spoken to you about in the past, but I don't think I ever have. It is about the extremely common practice now of people being apparently unaware of headphones. And I mean, Adrian uses an example of being on a train at the beginning of the last decade, and there was a child watching on a tablet without headphones, and it was really getting on their nerves. It wasn't super loud, but you know, that sort of ding diddle ding diddle ding diddle ding in the background. So he did, and I've done this, but not for a very, very long time. When I had those white wired Apple headphones, and he got them out of his pocket and offered them to the child, and the mum was grateful. So whether they'd forgotten their headphones or whether they'd I lost them or whatever it might be, he offered them the headphones out of his bag, connected them, the mum then connected them to the iPad, and everybody was happy. And Adrian writes in the best column that any national newspaper currently carries, I got a round of applause from men, women and children of many nations. I don't know why it's those three words at the end of the sentence that explain Adrian's peculiar genius. Of many nations. Of many nations. Because he could have said, I got a round of applause from the whole carriage, but he didn't. He said men and women of many nations. And that felicitous choice of words creates this sense of universal approval, this sense of truly universal approval. And yet, as this entire column points out, that's a story from gentler days. I remember being irritated by the noise coming out of your earphones on public transport. Do you remember that? Do you remember when that was the annoyance? That you had your volume so high that I could hear the communards playing in the background, just through seepage, we might call it, seepage or leakage coming out of your earphones when I'm standing next to you on the that kind of thing. That used to be annoying. Imagine explaining to a young person now that it used to be annoying to be able to hear the leakage from another person's earphones or headphones. Because you know where we're going with this. It is now almost impossible, I think, almost impossible to travel by public transport without encountering somebody, and it could be a man and woman of any nation. This is what I find fascinating about this subject matter, is that you can say, and I get it, so Elsa's already been in touch to say, I'm afraid of getting stabbed if I complain. But you are, and I know you're not saying this, but if you're listening to this and you don't recognise it because you never travel by public transport, although that one correspondent in the Guardian was on an aeroplane, I'm more on that shortly. It's universal. It doesn't seem to me to be confined to certain age groups, certain classes. It's certainly not confined to ethnicities. I think you notice it more if it's a foreign language that is being spoken, because somehow, I guess, if you can eavesdrop, it's probably less boring. Is that true? If you can eavesdrop on someone's conversation, is it less boring? I don't know, to be honest. But my goodness me, the way in which it has proliferated in recent years is extraordinary. Something to do with COVID? Did we forget? I mean, talking in the last hour about children not being socialised as a consequence of lockdown. Do you think that? Because that's what we're doing. We're not just going to do the, what have you done about it? We're interested in the roots of it. And indeed, as ever with Adrian Charles, he cuts to the heart of the matter. He said, I spent a couple of stops trying to work out how, in an utterly non-confrontational way, I could ask her what she was up to. Because he found himself on a bus, and he was on the same bus with a woman who was listening to music so loud, that if any of us had dared to say anything, we would have had to shout to make ourselves heard. And then he takes up on Elsa's point about feeling physically threatened by adding, before, I sense, having to run for our lives. One young woman with some very angry-sounding music fighting its way out of her phone. A dozen or so fellow travellers, all of whom, like me, said nothing. She was staring straight ahead. We were all looking down at our phones or looking at the floor, which takes us back to the letter in The Guardian today. I did what we all do and sat and stewed in silence. And then she took a call from some bloke, and we all listened to the conversation, which was just as loud. And as far as I could work out, the conversation was about some smelly clothes getting washed. And this went on for so long that I found myself yearning for the return of the dreadful music. I told you it was a good column. He writes like a dream. It's a thing of beauty. But this is where I want you to speak to me. Ideally not on a bus with me on full volume. Although I suppose there are some circumstances in which it could be considered a public service to have the speaker function on your phone turned up to maximum while some sound is coming out of it. Adrian Charles writes, I was fascinated more than angered by this absurd performance. Depends entirely what mood you're in. If you're in the right mood, you find things fascinating. This is my job that I'm describing. If you're in the wrong mood, you find things incredibly annoying. You get things absolutely right, you get a lovely mixture of fascinating and annoying. I was fascinated more than angered by this absurd performance. What's it all about? Try as I might to find a charitable explanation, the only one I could come up with is that it was a giant two-fingered gesture to the whole world, wordlessly posing the question, I know this is out of order, but what are you going to do to stop me? And then he adds, I spent a couple of stops trying to work out how, in an utterly unconfrontational way, I could ask her what she was up to. But before I came up with anything, she got off. She alighted. Great use of English. She alighted. And for the time being, I remain none the wiser. And he adds, if you have an explanation of any kind, please do share it with me. And nobody does. So the letters page today, and I think the piece appeared at the weekend, has no answers to the question of what was going on in her mind. What is going on in the mind of the person that does it? Which is why Nick's letter to The Guardian today is so interesting, because he talks about being on an aeroplane and sitting directly next to, a guy on a flight who watched the entirety of an explosion and gunfire-filled action film on his phone with no headphones. And this is the bit I found really interesting. We'd spoken a little pre-flight, and at the time I realised that this was my best chance to ask someone what the hell they thought they were doing. I also realised that if it went down badly, I had nowhere else to go, so I did what we all do and sat and stewed in silence. So that's the point, isn't it? You're there. It is in this guy's case. You've never had the chance. I've never had the chance to ask the person. I've made my feelings clear on a couple of occasions. I was on a bus once. There was only two of us on the top deck of a bus, and I was trying to make a phone call, and the bloke behind me was on absolute full volume, and I just turned around very politely and signalled that I was on the phone like that. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm on the radio. But if you're watching this on YouTube, so I go like this, that I'm on the phone. And he literally just took himself off speaker and still quite loud, but nowhere near as loud, and continued his conversation on the phone. That's going back that's pre-COVID. I've never had the opportunity to ask somebody, what on earth do you think you're doing? I'm not built like I used to be in social situations. I don't really want to have a bit of a row. And as in fact, as this letter in The Guardian points out, if you do it, I mean, you almost need to do it 2 minutes before you're getting off, in case things get a bit fractious or things get a bit leery. So there's no perfect moment at which to say. And if you're a man and it's a young woman doing it, you can't go there anyway, because it would appear creepy or aggressive or unkind. And then if you're worried about the aggression of the person that's doing it, then there's another reason why you don't do it. So you never get the chance to do it. You never get the chance to say to someone, why are you doing that? There's no earthly way that all of the people that do this now routinely have just left their headphones at home. One letter in the newspaper suggests it might be a consequence of all the coverage of the negative impact that headphones can have on people and the relationship with hearing loss. But I don't think so. Do you? It seems unlikely. So, 2 questions posed by Adrian Chiles. The first, what can you do about it? I mean, what can you do about it? You're not going to do something that might kick off. I don't think you can do anything about it. Is that, I mean, the one guy, the guy who told his wife to put the dog in the oven, that is the tactic that you might deploy when you just go and sit next to someone and have an equally loud conversation about something utterly nonsensical, or you join in their conversations offering advice and comments. When mobile phones first appeared, with the ugly aspect of loud conversations in public transport, I used to join in on people's conversations, offering advice and comments. Often it had the desired effect of encouraging the users to terminate their conversations. I quite like that. So what can you do about it? 0345 606 0973. But I don't know that is actually very fertile ground for us to explore together. But this question is, what's going on? What's going on? And as with the conversation in the last hour, what has caused the change? So we know what's changed. Teachers have got incredibly high stress levels. But what has caused the change? Because there's nothing new about this technology. We've had the ability to unplug our phones or our tablets from our headphones for years, and yet it never would have occurred to us. I think I took a call once from someone who claimed he'd take his scissors with him on a train so he could cut the wires of someone else listening on headphones if the music leaking out of the headphones was too loud. These were happier times. That feels like a generations ago, doesn't it? When you'd be annoyed about the noise leaking out of somebody else's headphones. Now, you're looking at people getting onto public transport or aeroplanes, in the case of one of these correspondents, and what would be, for us, impossible to contemplate, that disconnect between doing it and not doing it, getting your phone out of your pocket in a room or a space, a carriage, a cabin full of people, and thinking, I'm going to inflict what I am listening on to all of them. Do they not realise? 0345 6060973. Do they not care? 0345 6060973. Or do they not know? Do they not know? I mean, what explains it psychologically? And listen, I'm not going to shout at you if it's you. I think I'm not going to shout at you if it's you. But if you do this, I mean, ideally, someone listening to this right now has gone, oh my God, that's me. I've just never clocked how obnoxious it is before. But how can you not clock how obnoxious it is? Because you'll be getting on a bus next week or tomorrow or later today, and you're not in the middle of watching something or listening to something, but someone else is. So you sit there and you go, oh my days, that's so annoying. Oh gosh, I did that yesterday. I won't be doing that again. So how can it be such a commonplace thing when it's so obvious to everybody how obnoxious it is? Unless, of course, it isn't. Unless you're going to ring me and tell me you don't mind it at all. In fact, ring me on this and tell me anything you want. 0345 606 0973. Why do people do it? Why do you do it? Why don't you mind it? Why do you mind it? And what the heck can you do to stop other people from doing it? It's 12:21.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:23, and this is one of my all-time favourite words from Jeremy. I didn't think it was going to pop up today. I first came across this word when I was reading Samuel Beckett as a schoolboy. Would you believe? It's solipsism, James. Everyone else is considered as extras in their lives, or NPCs. I had to look up what NPCs means because What's His Chops keeps using it as a phrase. Dominic Cummings, non-playing characters, non-playable characters. So it's a video game analogy, and it also pops up in the book that I said I would be reminding you of today. I've remembered to do that. So I told you it was called A Spy Alone, which isn't true. That's the first book written by Charles Beaumont, the nom de plume of a former MI6 officer. The new book is called A Spy at War, and it's brilliant. I think I turned you on to Mick Herron, didn't I? Was it me that told you about Mick Herron? And think how much you've enjoyed that. And Slow Horses, of course, now an absolute smash hit TV series with Gary Oldman knocking everything out of the park. Well, trust me, that Charles Beaumont is worthy of being mentioned in the same breath as Mick Herron. And so far, A Spy at War looks like being at least as good, if not better, than A Spy Alone. Anthony says he's right. Jeremy's right. It's main character syndrome. But I still want to explore that further, because I'm not exactly what you would call overburdened with modesty. But if I get onto public transport, I'm discreet. I don't want you listening to my conversation, and I wouldn't in a million years dream of playing music or watching something out of my phone without having earphones. I just don't get it. Dan's in Southfields. Dan, what do you reckon?
Morning, James.
Hello.
So, interestingly, I think there's more to this than I thought, certainly. Exactly the same thing happened to me on a tube carriage, about 5 people on the carriage, mainly ladies, and then me. I'm not a big guy.
Yeah.
And a guy comes in playing music really loudly, sat next to me, and I'm pondering, I'm thinking, what can I say to him? Do I say anything? Do I just leave it? He was quite a young lad, so, I thought, I just went down he was just a bit ignorant. Yeah. But I thought, do I pull him up on it? And I didn't. I wasn't brave enough to, because you just don't know where it's going to go, know. And there's not many other people on the carriage. If anything did sort of, if it started going pear-shaped. Yeah. Anyway, suddenly this big, burly, sort of kind of muscly guy gets on, and he turns it down. And
without anyone asking him to?
Without anyone asking him.
Right.
And I thought, this is really interesting.
Isn't
So
it?
there's actually a sort of power play here. When he felt strong in the carriage, when there was me and sort of 4 other ladies sitting there, He felt great at exerting his sort of authority on the. Clearly, that's what must have been going on in his mind, because when this guy got on, as I say, he immediately turned it down. Must have felt threatened by him, or thought that he might.
Maybe. I mean, it might. I mean, it could have been a coincidence, but but it's not going to explain every instance of this happening. Like although, as Adrian Charles said, even though he's talking about a young woman, is it just giving a sort of two fingers to the world? I know this is out of order, but what are you going to do to stop me? So someone gets on who appears to pose a physical threat, and you no longer want to be the provocateur.
Well, suddenly you're not the sort of alpha male on the carriage. You know, I think it's in this particular instance.
Yeah,
I'm like you. I'm very much a half glass full kind of guy.
Sure.
I'm thinking, look, he's just unaware. You know, just oblivious, just a bit clueless. But when that happened, and it wasn't coincidental,
it is a kind of it is a sort of jostling for position, a social jostling for position. And as Dan says, that might apply in this case, probably does from the details he's shared. But it doesn't, of course, explain the middle-aged mum who's doing it with her child sitting next to her. I don't think she's jostling for status on a bus, is she? On a tube carriage, and the people watching things, as this fellow encountered on a plane. And he's exactly right. That would have been a perfect opportunity to say, look, can I just ask you, I've noticed that recently, this is how I do it, okay, I've noticed recently a lot of people doing what you're doing, a lot of people watching films and TV shows on public transport, but without having their earphones in. Can I just ask, do you have some sort of ear infection? How would you phrase it? Has it never occurred to you that I don't want to listen to what you're listening to? What are you going to do? Frank's in Tameside. Frank, what would you like to say?
The Transpennine line from Victoria to York
Beautiful
is an
journey.
Absolute stunner for this sort of thing.
Is it really? It's one of my favourite train journeys in the country, that, Frank.
Oh, by the way,
what?
Blakedown.
Well played. Look at that. You looked it up, you cheat. Honestly.
Well, on Saturday, Bahamas is coming down to the valley, and there is a station at Bewdley on the Severn Valley.
Oh, on the steam train. You're absolutely right. There is a station.
Yeah.
So, I stand corrected.
One particular Saturday morning, we were going over to York, my wife and I.
Yes.
Typical Saturday morning, there's hordes of lads on the platform with football scarves and 4 cans of Stella hanging off the wrists.
Yes.
So train came in, and we had first-class travel passes as a result of my employment on the railway.
Lovely.
So in we went, sat down, to be followed by this gang of leather-jacketed thugs.
Right.
One of whom sits down, whips out his mobile phone, full volume, and sits there bopping along to rap music.
Yeah.
So, like you said, head down, not getting
looking
involved.
At your shoes.
Yeah. What does the wife do? She leans forward, taps him on the shoulder, and said, would you mind turning it up then? We can all hear it.
I like that, actually. What did he do?
Well, he was a bit chirpy about it. So the only thing to do was to say, look, you can turn it off, or I will go and get the guard. Knowing full well, of course, that operating staff aren't paid anything like enough to get themselves in a risky situation.
No, exactly that.
Anyway, it did settle down. But then there was another occasion. It was just unbelievable. I've been to a function at the Railway Museum in York.
Oh, lovely.
4:30, catch the train back from York. 4 Bay.
Yeah.
These 3 ladies came and sat around me.
Right.
Halfway to Leeds, the lady next to me jumps in the air and starts berating this guy opposite. Turns out she was a German tourist.
Right.
And this guy, unbelievably, this is a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
He'd spat on the floor and missed a toe by about 2 inches.
Oh.
So he got a lecture. So to try and sort of show how defiant he was, out came the baccy tin, and he starts rolling one. So at this point, I leaned forward and said, excuse me, but you might notice there's a sign on the window that says no smoking.
Give me the punchline. I'm late. Give me the punchline, Frank. I'm late for the news.
Well, anyway, I ended up getting this lot arrested at Leeds. This guy's mate jumps up from the seat and threatens to follow me across Manchester and deal with me.
Flipping heck.
Behind him was the biggest sergeant you've ever seen.
Love it.
Got him by the scruff of the neck.
You've gone multi-topical. I'm only interested in the noise pollution, but if I was interested in the other elements of these sort of personal interventions, then you'd be top of the class. Frank, always a pleasure to hear your voice. Thank you. Tim Humphries here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
35 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question of why it happens now so commonly is going to be a lot harder to answer than what your personal experience of it is. But and I enjoy personal experiences, but I am interested in why it has become so commonplace for people to eschew headphones or earphones when they are watching or listening to content on their phones or tablets. One suggestion that because phones increasingly don't have a jack, this is from Ella, to plug in wired headphones. Is that true? Is that true? I've only had an iPhone really now for as long as I can remember. That's always had a jack, but I've got nice wireless kit as well, what with being a fully paid up member of the Metropolitan Liberal Elite. So might that be part of it? Phones that don't actually have a headphone jack and wireless are easy to lose, or they're not prohibitively expensive, but everything's prohibitively expensive for someone. That might be part of it. That's a generous analysis. Dean's in Chinner. Dean, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I've done this twice. I've told people off.
Yeah.
I just think it's rudeness.
Well, of course it's rudeness.
Rude.
Yes.
The first time somebody came on with what people of a certain age call a boombox.
Yeah.
And I was about to switch that on. And I said, please don't switch that on because nobody wants to listen to music. And she got very aggressive about it. And everybody else in the carriage went, thank you for saying that.
Yes.
The second time, I was on a train from Chinner to London, and there's 4 people on there, and he put his phone on.
Right.
And the lady said, please don't put your phone on. And he got very aggressive and sweary with her.
Yeah.
So I would normally not jump in, but I did jump in. And then he got very aggressive with me. I'm quite a large lad. Sure. He stared me out, and I stared him out. But I just...
So there are 2 different things going on there. The boombox is a deliberate act of provocation.
Yeah.
Of that, there can be no doubt. With the phone, there's a little bit of wiggle room. Otherwise, this wouldn't be an interesting conversation. Nobody's sitting there wondering what the psychological motivation of someone who's going to pull out a ghetto blaster on a crowded train is. They are obnoxious and they are announcing to the world that they don't care what you think. But the phone, there's always room for... Well, maybe I'm being too generous. Is there room for... Because I'm thinking of some of the women I've encountered doing it. One I think of particularly who was with her child. And I honestly don't think they realise how obnoxious they're being. But maybe I'm being naive again.
I would not say... I would not disagree with you, other than he was so aggressive to the woman.
Yes.
Which is why I felt I needed to get involved.
No, well, he was being obnoxious. He had the same attitude as the woman with the ghetto blaster, but not every phone user does, I don't think. You see people... Thank you, Dean. The people who talk like this, what's that about? I just realised you can't see me, but do you know what I mean? When you're walking around using your phone like a walkie-talkie as well. It's not as obnoxious as listening to loud music or what, but why do people do that? I see people doing that all the time. So am I on speaker if I'm doing that? Have I got you on speaker? So it's still a bit weird, right? Is it The Apprentice? You're the second person to say that, Keith. I got a message saying it was all about The Apprentice as well. Do we know why people do that? Do we know? Do you know what I'm doing when I say, do we know why people do it? So you're holding your phone horizontally in front of your mouth, like a piece of cutlery almost. And you're having a conversation into the mouthpiece here. And then I know that, but you ring me on speaker, that's different because you might be in the car or something like that. But if you're walking down the street and you got me on speaker. Gary's been in touch with the one circumstance in which this sort of behaviour is acceptable. I was quietly sitting on the viewing platform, sipping a coffee as I watched my youngest during his swimming lesson. Whose voice did I hear belting out behind me? Yours. It was a lady sitting behind me and it was a YouTube clip. Well, I think that's perfectly acceptable. That to me is missionary work. That is introducing me to people who may not have been aware of our shared genius previously. So that's very different. Imogen's in Wimbledon. Imogen, what would you like to say?
Hi, I just had to kind of call in because I actually heard Sheila's phoning about it the other day, and I feel like no one talks about it anymore, and it's really normalised. But I sort of get on public transport every day.
Why are they doing it, Imogen? Why are they doing it? What is going on in there? I mean, have we got... Let me just check my screen. Why won't anyone ring me who does it? Because does that mean they know that they're obnoxious? Because I've got this idea they might not know that they're obnoxious.
No, I think personally, I do think they realise sort of what they're doing. But I think people just don't care. And I think it kind of comes back to sort of like a social disconnect. Maybe like COVID didn't help as well. But I just think like even just social aspect-wise, I will like smile at someone, you know, or I hold the door open for someone, just a stranger, just a normal thing. But I think that's normal. But I think even sometimes when I smile at people, they look at me like why are you
weird.
smiling at me?
Well, you might have quite a scary smile. I do. So
maybe,
you know.
Maybe I do,
have you got me on speaker at the moment?
I don't. No, you're in my headphones.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's the same problem, isn't it?
What's the same problem? Sorry.
Well, you're going to be talking more loudly if you've got me on your headphones than you would be if you were using your phone normally.
Yeah, I think so. And you have that noise cancelling as well. So even I have made calls on. I haven't sort of.
But you're part of the problem. You think you phone me up to tell me you're part of the solution. Where are you at the moment, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm actually at work at the moment.
You're at work?
Yeah.
So you're sitting at work bellowing away to some bloke on the radio with your noise-cancelling headphones on?
No, I'm in a room by myself, don't worry.
All right, then. I'll let you off on this occasion.
I wasn't, sorry.
No, and those are circumstances. Those are things. The quality of the audio is not as good as it would be. So if you just heard Imogen there and you wonder why we get I say we, it's Eleanor mostly, and Keith. I'm too equable and easygoing, really, to mind about this kind of thing. That's why we always ask you when you ring in to not use your headphones. They spend 90% of their time asking people to come off speakerphone before coming on the radio because the quality of the audio that you hear. So if you're this person, then your point will be much clearer. Your contribution will be much clearer. The clarity will be much greater if you do what you're asked to do and come off the speakerphone or come off the headphones, even if you're not on speakerphone. The quality of the audio that we end up broadcasting. I'm not shouting at Imogen now. I'm just reading what Eleanor's written on the screen about all 48 pages of it. We spend 90% of our time asking people to come off speakerphone or Bluetooth. And the reason is because we're trying to make good radio, right? I know what you're thinking. When's that going to start? But we're trying every day to make good radio, and one day we will succeed. And there are two elements to good radio. There is content and there is context. Content is kind of my job. Context is yours. It's the quality of the audio that we broadcast that improves exponentially if you come off this thing. But no one's going to call me who does it. That's it. I'm going to retire. I'm not going to retire. But why won't anyone call me who does it? There must be people listening to this who know that they do it. Watching stuff in particular. Why do you watch stuff on public transport or in McDonald's? Other fast food restaurants are available. When you know. Or could someone look me in the eye and tell me I had no idea? It never occurred to me how rude this was until I tuned into your programme today. Shayla's in Exmouth. Shayla, what would you like to say?
Hi. I do agree that I am at fault for playing stuff out on my phone aloud. But in respect to other people around me, I don't blare it out. But I do have a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old that if they screaming their heads off and I battle to calm them down in public, getting my phone out and putting something calming on for them at a respectful volume, it's something that I would do. You know, you can't expect me. Yeah, you can't expect me to put earphones in my baby's ears. I mean, that just won't work.
Can they not? Do they not respond just to the visuals? Do they not respond just to the game or to the cartoon or the animation?
Yeah, my 1-year-old does, but my 2-year-old, who's nearly 3 now, I mean, he likes to listen to what's going on. You know, and even though it is at a respectable volume, I mean, as the public, what would you rather have? A screaming child that won't calm down, or one that's sitting there nicely watching something quietly on the phone?
And that's a very good point. I mean, it's not. Some people listening would say it's not either or. And this isn't me, I want to stress, Shayla. This is someone else that I'm imagining what they might be thinking. And they'd be thinking you should be able to control your children without having resort to your phone, content on your phone. But I think that's a bit pie in the sky, especially if you've got 2 under 3s. It's like spinning plates or herding cats sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, especially if you're out by yourself. You know, you are trying to please your children. You're trying to stop the comments from people, because we all know what the public can be like, and they are very judgmental, you know, and just trying to keep your children calm, getting your phone out.
I mean, this is a side order to the central conversation. It's more as if you were there without your children and you decided to listen to some music and you didn't use headphones. I mean, it's not as nowhere near as I don't.
Yeah.
And do people ever complain to you? Do people ever say,
well, I have had a few comments of people come up to me and, you know, they don't really want to be listening to that. And I'm like, you know, but it's not like I'm sat on the train blaring out Miss Rachel.
No, but I still think, who? Miss Rachel? Is that a popular artiste?
Yeah, for toddlers.
Oh, I see. Sorry, I thought you were introducing me to some music genres that I hadn't stumbled across before. Blaring out, so that's like Peppa Pig was back in the day.
Yes. Yes.
I think I'd still be annoyed by you, wouldn't I, if I was on the same bus? But not necessarily fairly, because, as you say, if the alternative... And do you only do it when they get fractious, or is it actually normal behaviour just to do it? The default position, and I'm just so you know, I've got technology in the studio. I'll be able to tell if you fib to me.
No, it is only just when they are playing me up, and normally it's around when they start getting tired and they fed up.
Bit hungry, bit tired, and they start getting a bit whiny. Whiny becomes bit waily. Waily becomes cryy. Give them the phone, and they're just going to be distracted for long enough for you to get home. Okay. I think I would maybe give you a dispensation on that one. 12:47 is the time. But is a grown-up who does it going to tell me why they do it? 0345 6060 973. It's 12:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
1 is the time. And I'll just do you the hook and tease quickly. So here you go. Here are some facts and some figures. 1,292 offenders were jailed for their part in the trouble. The average custodial sentence was 16.8 months, more than 4 times the average term handed down by magistrates' courts for similar offences. It means that about 1,808 years of sentencing were handed down to rioters. And as one Crown Prosecution Service chief prosecutor said, they could see the criminal justice system responding, and that sent a really strong message from society that this was unacceptable. That's the whole point about sentencing during very, very serious public riots, is that there has to be an element of deterrent as well. So it's all about context, which is precisely why you were likely to get 4 times longer or 4 times more punishment than you'd have got for a similar offence if it hadn't taken place during the moment of rioting. And the reason why this is proof that there's no such thing as two-tier policing last summer, this was in 2011, after the police shot Mark Duggan and rioting and looting began in Tottenham. So that's why policing levels during rioting will feel different, or prosecutorial responses will feel different from how they do during periods not of rioting. And that's been true since anybody started using the phrase two-tier policing or two-tier care to describe what the response to the Farage riots was. And it's only, 14 years ago. Absolutely conclusive proof that it's rioting that creates the context in which these matters of law and order occur, and nothing to do with who is doing the rioting. And that's the end of my TED Talk. Lee's in Stevenage on the question of who the hell plays their music on public transport without earphones. Lee, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. How are you?
Very well, Lee. What's on your mind?
Good. So, please don't rip into me too hard. I'm calling up because I used to be a teenager that would play his music on the back of the bus. And the classic thing would be to set it aside up against the window as well, just so that the max volume could be amplified just that little bit more.
I don't think we should have shared that. I had no idea that was a thing. So you turn the whole bus into a sort of echo chamber?
Almost, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
And
I did it, honestly, because at that age I would see other teenagers doing it. And I thought it was cool. To be totally honest with you. You wanted to be centre of attention. I've always had that kind of personality anyway. And Yeah,
and it worked.
To have the cojones to do it and be.
So you admired the other people that did it. So there's a little bit of a screw you element to it as well.
A little bit, I guess.
Which appeals to teenagers. It appeals to teenagers.
Yes, I guess it does. But it stops because someone just absolutely snapped at me like he was on his last straw with
what, like Michael Douglas in that film. What's that film? Yes, I go to not breaking point. Anyway, go on. What happened?
Well, that was it. He was at breaking point.
Really?
He must have had some other stuff going on as well. And I think I saw him sort of seething there a little bit.
Yeah.
And he just erupted out of nowhere. Will you please shut up?
Oh, fantastic.
And I just clammed up. I went completely silent.
You're a nice lad then.
Done it since.
Well, then, because you could have. I mean, if you were a nasty piece of work, you'd have found that hilarious, and you'd have mocked him, and you'd have made everything worse.
I was with a friend of mine as well. We both sat there just staring at our feet after that.
This isn't great. This is not good, and neither is it cool to be screamed at by a very angry bloke on the bus. Well, all right. I mean, not quite there. I'm looking really for the middle-aged woman who does it, and whether or not it's ever crossed her mind how obnoxious she is being. But Lee, well done. Falling down. Thank you. 763 people have just texted me the words falling down to describe the Michael Douglas film, which I temporarily could not remember. And Lee's the closest I think we're going to get to the admission, the confession. Henry Riley is here. What have you've got two things for me, Henry, as you flex your muscles prior to contributing to the programme.
There are two. There's firstly Andrew Bridgen versus Matt Hancock, and then there's also
talk about a difficult choice. What are you supposed to do? Pick a favourite?
And then there's the 15 individuals, some connected to the Conservative Party with regards to gambling.
Go on then. Start with Bridgen and Hancock. Remind us what the story is, and then tell us what the latest.
So this is going back a few years now to do when they were both Conservative MPs, which seems like a sort of lifetime ago, doesn't it? But Andrew Bridgen shared a post on his social media about what he described as concerning data about deaths and other adverse reactions to the COVID vaccine. He then used the phrase, as one consultant cardiologist said to me, this is the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust.
Wow.
That then led to Matt Hancock later on shared a video of himself in the House of Commons where he said, the disgusting and dangerous anti-Semitic, anti-vax, anti-scientific conspiracy theories spouted by a sitting MP this morning are unacceptable and have absolutely no place in our society. Andrew Bridgen then took legal action, is taking legal action against Matt Hancock. Last year, Matt Hancock tried to have this effectively thrown out, saying it shouldn't go to trial. Again today was the sort of second attempt at preventing it from going to trial. And effectively, Andrew Bridgen has been successful in that there will be a trial. So this has not been thrown out completely. The burden would seem very much now on Matt Hancock to try and prove this. The judge, Collins Rice, Mrs. Justice Collins Rice, said that the sort of onus here now is looking at whether Matt Hancock's post was condemning the MP as an individual and whether it was sort of expressing his own opinion. So a statement of fact versus individual. The things
I'm surprised this guy. I thought I read a month ago that Bridgen had been told he was almost certain to lose.
Yeah, and I think that there are people who are surprised by this. The main contention Andrew Bridgen's team have, James, is the characterisation of the tweet as anti-Semitic. And the person who's acting for him, Christopher Newman, saying that that's the death knell of an MP to be described as anti-Semitic. So we might have a sort of another Wagatha Christie on our hands with the trial.
Who's paying his legal fees? Do we know? Is it? Did he crowdfund?
He has crowdfunded a lot of it. Yeah,
Right.
Donations on his website.
Okay, and I would need to be a little bit more careful with the next one because charges have now been brought against these people.
Yeah, 15 individuals, James, including Craig Williams, the Parliamentary Private Secretary of Rishi Sunak. Just to explain what that is, that's effectively the eyes and ears of the Prime Minister with his backbenchers and the relationship with the Parliamentary Party. And it dominated headlines during the general election. It was just over 3 weeks before polling day that this emerged on the 12th of June. The allegation that the MP admitted to having a flutter on the election date 3 days before it was publicly announced by Rishi Sunak. There has been a statement now from both the Conservatives and Labour Party. The Conservatives saying that current members of staff who've been charged with this are being suspended with immediate effect. They believe that those working in politics should act with integrity. Those are the words of the Conservative Party. And the other individuals who've been suspended, Russell George, who's been suspended now, who as part of the process, who's a Senedd member from Montgomeryshire for the Conservative Party. And then if you look through, there's another whole list of people. I won't go through them all, but for example, there was one sort of quite famous case, which was Tony Lee, who's the party's director of campaigning. He and his wife, Laura Saunders, who was the party's candidate in Bristol North West, also charged with the Gambling Commission. There's a name called Jeremy Hunt on the list as well, not the Conservative MP. That is a former police officer, as cleared up by the Gambling Commission. But you'll recall the Met Police, James, last year actually said that they couldn't take this any further after advice from the Crown Prosecution Service. Well, these 15 individuals will now appear at Westminster Magistrates Court at 10 o'clock in the morning on the 13th of June.
And so quick verdicts then if it's magistrates.
Yeah.
One imagines. Yeah. Can you ask to go to Crown if you get sent to a magistrates court?
I don't know, actually, if I'm being completely
with your history of experience in this field. Henry Riley, who's never, ever, ever been convicted. Never been caught. It's coming up to 12:59. That is it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Actually, also, full disclosure this week, is Stephen Frayne, the artist formerly known as Dynamo, and I don't remember the last time I got so much comment about a podcast, about a full disclosure, actually. He's really touched a lot of people, so let me recommend that to you as well. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.